Chapter 541, Desolate Queen. Phew, phew. Strong winds blew while the red clouds tumbled in various directions wantonly. In the red clouds, Jiang Shiro's body was slowly being lifted up. Her hair and clothes began to flutter. There was such a vast amount of power of desolates between heaven and earth that throbbed intensely were like a heartbeat. They resonated with the blood within all of the desolate beasts that were present. Some desolate beasts raised their heads and looked at the beautiful girl soaked in the Red Sea in the sky. At this moment, the slender lass was like the center of the world. Slowly, numerous blood strands began to emanate towards Jiang Shiro inside the tumbling red clouds. The growls of uncountable numbers of ancient desolate beasts seemed to be mixed in with the heavy howling wind. The cold killing intent that inundated the skies made Jiang Shiro recall the day at the Chu Prefecture city. When her bloodline and identity was revealed, that mild-mannered man had suddenly turned ferocious like a beast. The killing intent he manifested was suffocating. And facing that enemy, with no hopes of beating him, Yun still resisted while risking his life. He had put down his pride, but anything he did was completely meaningless. Boom! As the red cloud suddenly moved, Jiang Shiro stretched her arms out flat. She immersed herself in the energetic baptism. Her body seemed to be the connection point between the energies of heavens and earth. The red clouds were tumbling around her, while the blood strands gathered around her, forming into a blood-red totem. Swirls, flitting. Jiang Shiro began to spin above the divine bone altar, in the middle of heavens and earth. The totems increased in number as they covered Jiang Shiro's body. They looked fanciful and pretty. Her cheeks were filled with complex patterns. They looked like tattoos as they emitted a faint, red glow under her snow-like skin. Jiang Shiro closed her eyes as she buried her memories deep into her heart. When she opened her eyes again, there seemed to be lightning discharging from her gaze. Pa! Pa! Jiang Shiro began to tap into the empty air with the bone cane. Every tap caused thunder to resound in the red clouds. Her blood began to boil at this moment. The power of her chi and blood now merged with the power of heaven and earth. Boom! The red clouds dispersed out in all directions. The violent winds abruptly came to a halt. The power of Desolate Sea also ceased its actions. Everything seemed to quiet down, revealing a deep blue sky. All the desolate beasts held their breaths as they were prostrated on the ground. There were even desolate beasts who were gently trembling. In the vast sky, behind the girl who seemed to be standing on the top of a cloud, a pair of giant eyes quietly appeared. This pair of eyes seemed like a window that had suddenly opened in the sky. They were thin and long, but red. They seemed to have an air of indifference as they projected from the sky. The totem lines on Jiang Shiro's body became even brighter. She slightly raised her beautiful head and her original pair of bright black eyes suddenly turned red in color as well, resembling the heartless red eyes behind her. Jiang Shiro indifferently swept her eyes forward. The desolate beasts that met her gaze showed fear as they lowered their heads to the ground. Numerous desolate beasts prostrated themselves before Jiang Shiro as well as that pair of gigantic eyes behind her. Sacred Spirit! Seeing the gigantic eyes in the sky, the unsurpassed beauty of a generation far off in the distance was relieved. Jiang Shiro had not only awakened her ancient bloodline, she had even made the Sacred Spirit's phantom image appear. It was equivalent to receiving the recognition of the Sacred Spirit. Her daughter had not disappointed her, but had she disappointed her daughter instead? The beauty shook her head gently. The gaze she used to look at Jiang Shiro was filled with both love and guilt. High in the sky, Jiang Shiro was silent. She held the bone cane in hand, while behind her, the pair of gigantic eyes began to slowly reveal its entire bodily form. It was a colossal head. It covered almost all of the space between the heavens and earth. Just the head alone was taller than the highest mountains in the divine wilderness. The Sacred Spirit's phantom image turned clear, one could now see its nose, mouth, and sharp teeth. Its main body was that of a gigantic fox. Its body was covered in fiery red fur. Every strand of fur was like a towering divine tree. Behind it, in the endless sky, 6 tails which resembled red dragons were waving about. These 6 tails were like divine fires that screamed upwards into the sky. The other end of the tails seemed to be located somewhere even higher than the skies. The sacred spirit slowly lowered its head in front of Jiang Xioro. Jiang Xioro's body flew higher and higher until she reached the sacred spirit's forehead. She then landed gently in the middle of the sacred spirit's eyebrows. At the blood fox sacred spirit's forehead, there were 3 cinnabar dots that were identical to Jiang Xioro's. They excluded a mysterious and ancient aura. At that moment, Jiang Xioro, who stood on the top of the sacred spirit's head, was worshipped by the billions of desolate beasts present. She had now obtained the recognition of the desolate beasts completely and had become the new desolate queen of this generation. While this grand ritual was happening in the divine wilderness, outside the great Empress Mystic Realm, the geniuses that had been trapped in the Mystic Realm for about a year had finally come out. The elders of the large factions had longed for this day until their eyes protruded and their necks stretched out long. They had waited for this very moment. It was not easy. The wait first ended with a pile of corpses, then 2 living zombies. Finally, our wait has been rewarded with living people. That is right, the trials have finally ended. It has been about a year. I wonder what opportunities these juniors have obtained. While many were full of anticipation, Shintuju's face was sullen. With everyone out, he could finally figure out how Shintu Nantian had died. Who was the person that had the guts and strength to kill all of the Shintu family clan's members? Shintuju wanted to know the cause behind Shintu Nanshan's death, while the upper echelons of the other factions were also asking about the opportunities obtained in the Great Empress Mystic Realm. However, many juniors spoke hesitantly about these, as if they were hiding something. The elders present were all very knowledgeable people. As expected by Yi Yun, they quickly discovered that their juniors had signed a soul contract. What? What kind of person has the power to force so many of you to sign a soul contract? Were there other hidden players in this expedition to the Great Empress Mystic Realm? The elders present began to discuss as Shintuju coldly grunted and said, "It is understandable. An enemy that can completely wipe out my Shintu family clan cannot be a junior that entered the Mystic Realm to participate in the trials. There must be some other existence. It looks like there were a lot of unexpected circumstances in the Great Empress Mystic Realm trials. Especially the Lin family. They are furtive in their actions. Up to now, not a single one of them has appeared. It is very likely that they were involved in the plot to murder the elites of my Shintu family clan. Maybe they sneakily attacked my Shintu family clan disciples when they were injured, striking them while they were down." Shintuju gnashed his teeth. And at this moment, a few juniors had their soul contracts removed. Removing soul contracts on people below the Daoseed realm was nothing difficult for Imperial King experts. That. A few juniors looked at Shintuju. They felt fear facing the killing intent exuding from the elder's body. "Tell me, how did my Shintu family clan's disciples die?" Shintuju's voice was crisp. The sound waves entered straight into the ear. "More than half a year ago, a gigantic eye appeared in the eternal whirlpool. Did you discover any strange phenomenon in the mystic realm that may have something to do with this? Was the death of Shintu Nantian and Shintuya a result of the appearance of this eye? An eye in the eternal whirlpool?" A few juniors looked each other in the eye and were at a loss. "More than half a year ago, we were in the God Advent Tower. We did not notice any phenomenon like an eye." As for Shintu Nanshan's death, a junior gulped a mouthful of saliva and said very carefully, "He was killed by Yi Yun. Yi Yun shot an arrow and slashed twice with a sword. Then, Shintu Nantian died. Also, the other Shintu family clan disciples were also shot to death by Yi Yun with an arrow each." Oh yes, Shintuya was not killed by Yi Yun. He tried to sneak up while Yi Yun and Shintu Nantian were battling, but he was then slashed by Lin Shintong, who was guarding him by the side. There were many people who participated in this sneak attack. It included the Li Fire sect as well as the Hong Association. They too were slashed by Lin Shintong. Upon saying this, the juniors suddenly saw Shintuju's flesh twitch. The blood vessels on his forehead were raised and his eyeballs were protruding. It was a very frightening look. Besides Shintuju, the other elders of the other family clans were dumbfounded when they heard this. There were more and more juniors who had the soul contract removed. However, no one objected to what was said. Clearly, the sequence of events did not veer too far off from what they said. All the cultivators, including Shintu Nantian, had been killed by Yi Yun and Lin Shintong? What the hell was going on? What did you say? Shintuju roared as his eyes turned bloodshot. A few juniors jumped up in fright. Against Shintuju, the pressure they experienced was too great. They hurriedly said, "What we said is the truth." Shintu Nantian was slashed to death by Yi Yun. The others were shot to death by Yi Yun. He shot those arrows at once. They were all dead in the blink of an eye. As for the specifics, we did not see it clearly. If you want to know the details about how the Shintu family clan disciples died, you can ask the Dao Seed Realm cultivators. They should have been able to see it clearer than us. The few juniors hurriedly distanced themselves from the topic. At this moment, Shintuju's expression was completely distorted. His face kept twitching. After asking several cultivators, he received the exact same answer. Shintu Nantian and company had really all been killed by Yi Yun and Lin Shintong. People from the Li Fire sect and the Hong Association found it hard to believe. However, the facts were placed before them. They could only choose to believe it. Impossible. It must be that the little bastard, Yi Yun, and that little slut, Lin Shintong, colluded with someone behind the scenes. They sneaked up on Tian'er and company and hurt them in the guise of someone else. By the time Shintuju and company had accepted the facts, Thousand Hand Granny screamed. She found it impossible to believe that Shintu Nantian, to whom she had attached such great importance, could be killed by a young Yi Yun who had come from the backwater East's cloud wilderness. This was an insult to Shintu Nantian. At this moment, the warrior with the surname Shui, who had been the one to negotiate with Yi Yun about signing the soul contract, rolled his eyes at Thousand Hand Granny. He lightly said, "Granny, you really are overthinking it. Back then, we were all present. Everyone saw it. There was no one behind the scenes. As for sneak attacks, there was one. Unfortunately, those who tried to sneak attack were not Yi Yun and Lin Shintong, but Shintuya and company. This. The Thousand Hand Granny retreated a few steps in a powerless manner. She seemed to have lost her wits. The scene of the tragic look on the dead Shintu Nantian's face once again appeared before her eyes. In the past, she had always believed that Yi Yun had used insidious means, which allowed him to entrap Shintu Nantian at the relic trial. This time, however, in the great Empress Mystic Realm, Tian'er, who had made the adequate preparations to kill Yi Yun, had instead been killed by Yi Yun with his true strengths? Why was this happening? Chapter 542, End of the Trials. The outcome of this trial was bizarre. Many of the large factions of the Tian Yuan world present found it incredible that Yi Yun and Lin Shintong were able to kill Shintu Nantian as well as several Dao Seed Realm warriors. As many of the young elites were pressed by their family elders, they began to narrate everything that had happened within the great Empress Mystic Realm. They started from the beginning of the trial, to the number of Empyrean marks Yi Yun had obtained, until the mental demon trial, followed by the God Advent Tower. The news about the evaluation criteria set up by the ancient Great Empress at the Black Stone Square, which went from knight to canonized god, shocked everyone. Many factions found it hard to accept that the peerless geniuses they had painstakingly nurtured were only of such a low rank in the eyes of the ancient Great Empress. Some of them even failed to meet the lowest rank. This made many of the legendary figures realize the difficulty of the great Empress Mystic Realm's trials. However, despite such a high degree of difficulty, they were informed that Yi Yun and Lin Xintong managed to obtain the recognition of the ancient Great Empress inside the God Advent Tower. They had obtained a portion of the Great Empress inheritance. This was simply unbelievable. And from the looks of it, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had already mastered a portion of the Great Empress inheritance, or else their cultivation level and power would not have increased by such leaps and bounds. Logically speaking, the higher grade a cultivational inheritance was, the harder it would be to master. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had only received the inheritance roughly half a year ago, so how did they manage to master it so quickly? "We are returning to our family clan," an elder said with a grim face. Many elders were envious and jealous of Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. They had busied themselves so much, sending the most outstanding elites within their factions to participate in the Mystic Realm trials, but they only ended up being eliminated, with nothing to show for it all. The frustration in their hearts was understandable. There was no longer any meaning in remain here. Many people from the various factions had left, however, there were still a few family clans remaining as they eyed the Great Empress Mystic Realm. They secretly sent their people to watch the surroundings of the Great Empress Mystic Realm. They wanted to see if they could locate Yi Yun's whereabouts. Even though they had heard their young elites say that Yi Yun and Lin Xintong was planning to remain in reclusion in the Great Empress Mystic Realm for 100 years, there was still some doubts coming from these family clans. They also hoped that they would be lucky. Assigning people to stand guard was, after all, not something that cost them much. Similarly, the Shintu family clan was not planning on leaving. Shintu Ju and company had already accepted the facts, but they were still simmering with anger, with nowhere to vent it. Not only had Yi Yun foiled their scheme against the Lin family, they had also been forced to reveal the Great Empress Mystic Realm publicly because of him. He had also caused all of their elites to be wiped out in the Great Empress Mystic Realm. Their family clan's successor, Shintu Nantian, also died tragically. It was hard to even try to describe their terrible losses. For this Great Empress Mystic Realm's trial, they had been the organizer as well as the discoverer, but they had ended up as the biggest loser. Yi Yun, Lin Xintong. Shintu Ju's expression was gloomy. The aura he silently emitted caused the surrounding swirling storms to stagnate. Beside Shintu Ju was Thousand Hand Granny, who was now battered out of her wits. She suddenly trembled and raised her head, revealing her bloodshot eyes. She snapped, "The Lin family must have known about this matter earlier on. This must be why they left prematurely. We must make the Lin family pay." Didn't Lin Xintong and Yi Yun also kill several young elites from the other family clans? We can form an alliance and charge against the Lin family, wiping them all out. Wiping them all out? Shintu Ju coldly grunted and said in a heavy tone, "Did you not hear it just now? Yi Yun and Lin Xintong have already declared that they have cut their ties to the Lin family inside the Mystic Realm. If I am not wrong, after the Lin family returns to their territory, they will definitely begin defensive preparations, as well as announce that they are severing relations with Lin Xintong and Yi Yun. It is likely that Lin Xintong and Yi Yun will not return to the Lin family for the next few hundred years. With the Lin family not having the Great Empress inheritance, how can coercing the other factions to attack and decimate the Lin family be easy? Against a large family clan with a deep heritage, who is also well prepared, even if we manage to gain victory, we would also suffer heavy losses. Then, in the future, once Yi Yun and Lin Xintong have matured and become peerless great emperors, the two of them might come back and settle the scores. When that happens, all the factions involved in the attack against the Lin family will suffer. Who would want to do such a rewardless task? As for Yi Yun and Lin Xintong killing the other family clan's disciples, it might be quite regretful to have a few young elites dead, but that was in a mystic realm. It is expected that there will be death in mystic realms. Those who were killed can only blame themselves for being weaker than others. Furthermore, they were the ones who launched a sneak attack first. Reason was not on their side. As long as the Lin family pays a sufficient amount of reparations, these factions will not lose face, and might not even try to seek redress on this matter ever again. Under these circumstances, what use is there for us to go to against the Lin family? Shintu-ju snorted coldly and flicked his sleeves heavily. The Shintu family clan had lost a great deal of their future elites. If they forcefully went to war with the Lin family, resulting in many of the older generation dying, and with their juniors gone, then the Shintu family clan's foundation really would be shaken. It was even possible for them to completely collapse. Although Shintu-ju was furious, he did not let it get to his head. He still weighed the interests of the family clan. As for the grudge over Shintu Nantian and Company's death, Thousand Hand, take some people and stay guard around this area. Yi Yun must know of other exits. If you are able to find them, make them die miserably. Shintu-ju waved his hand. He seemed like he was unwilling to think about this matter that had given him a great setback. Thousand Hand Granny nodded her head grimly. Her wrinkled eyes emitted a ferocious flash that resembled a vulture's. 100 years was not long for a warrior like her. She had to tear Yun apart so as to appease the hatred in her heart. Half a month later, above a vast and empty land in the Tianyuan world, a lone towering peak stood here. It reached high up into the clouds and resembled a gigantic sword that fell from the sky and stabbed into the ground. From afar, one could feel a faint sword aura emanating from it, causing one's breathing to stagnate. The mountain winds whistled. Not a tiny bit of green could be seen on the mountain peak. It was filled with grayish-white boulders. This mountain peak was extremely famous in the Tianyuan world, as it was home to the headquarters of the #1 organization of the Tianyuan world, the Martial Alliance. There was only one extremely steep path up the mountain. It was as if it had been shaved off by swords or sabers. It reached up high into the sky. Just the slightest mistake would cause one to lose one's footing, with the result of one's body being smashed to pieces. A typical warrior could feel the pressure coming from the peak just by looking at the mountain path. This inadvertently caused them to feel fear. At this moment, on the long mountain path, two tiny figures were quickly scaling the mountain. Amongst these two figures, one of them was a youth with a face covered in blood. The other one had a gaping huge hole in his chest, together with a ruthless and sinister expression that belonged to Shintu Nantian. The two of them were the inspectors that had the blood moon mark on them. Chapter 543, Large Calamity. The two inspectors ran up the path leading to the heavens. They would occasionally encounter people from the Martial Alliance, however, strangely, none of these people managed to discover them. It was like they did not exist. The Martial Alliance's headquarters was situated at the end of the path. The headquarters was a magnificent stone tower. It was simplistic in style, and towered above the low-lying dark clouds which were rumbling with lightning. The two inspectors entered straight into the highest level of the stone tower. It was dim inside the stone tower. There was only a single bean-sized torch illuminating the empty tower. Upon entering the stone tower, it was as if the outside world became isolated from them, leaving only a dark and silent space as well as that tiny bit of light. In this space, it seemed like life and time did not exist. Even the concept of space did not seem to exist. It was as if everything had come to a halt in here. The moment the two inspectors entered the stone tower, they fell to the ground and revealed an extremely placatory look. "Lord Sacred Ambassador, us, subordinates have failed in our mission, please punish us." The two knelt on the ground and remained silent for a long period of time. Deep in the grand hall, there was a tall figure wearing a heavy long robe. He slowly walked out from the darkness. His looks were concealed by the shadows in the grand hall. One could only faintly discern a light red scar in the middle of his eyebrows. The scar seemed to radiate with a burning flame. If the house heads of the various large factions of the Tianyuan world were here, they would immediately identify this person with the fire scar. He was the current alliance leader of the Martial Alliance. He led several large factions in the Tianyuan world. He had absolute authority in the Tian Yuan world and his power was unfathomable. The two of you entered the Martial Alliance's headquarters directly in such a rush. There are many human experts here. With your cultivation levels, even if you use your Inspector illusion magic, you could still be easily noticed. This would lead to unnecessary suspicion. May the Sacred Ambassador forgive us. It is because of the sudden turn of events that these two subordinates need to report it to the Divine Master with such urgency. The two inspectors lowered their bodies even more. The Divine Master, they mentioned, was sleeping deep within God Burial Abyss. These two inspectors did not have the right, or ability, to see the real Divine Master. In fact, the Divine Master was practically a legend to them. They only had the right to meet the black-robed Sacred Ambassador standing before them. The Divine Master's orders were all conveyed through the black-robed Sacred Ambassador, who was also the Martial Alliance's alliance leader. The Martial Alliance had existed for a very long time. Over tens of millions of years, the Martial Alliance had taken deep root in the Tian Yuan world. It had matured to become a terrifying faction that was affiliated with various sects in the Tian Yuan world. As for the alliance leader of the Martial Alliance, he was designated only when the former alliance leader was near his deathbed. Every alliance leader had mysterious backgrounds. Other than the former Martial Alliance's leader, no one knew where they came from. Over time, people began to believe that every alliance leader would secretly nurture a successor. Before the successor was revealed, his identity was kept completely confidential. The man with the burning scar remained expressionless, making it impossible for one to tell if he was happy or angry. He slowly said, "The two of you entered the Great Empress Mystic Realm while aiding Black Spectre. Now, Black Spectre's soul jade slip has already shattered, while both of you are in such a state. Speak. What happened? How did the power of the Divine Master's Eye of Destruction get cut off by the God Advent Tower?" With the Eye of Destruction that appeared out of the God Burial Abyss mentioned, the two inspectors became even more placatory. They were absorbed by fear at the mention of the Eye of Destruction, as well as the Sacred Ambassador before them. The inspectors bowed their heads and recounted everything that had happened in the Great Empress Mystic Realm. The black-robed Sacred Ambassador listened in silence. It was impossible to read his thoughts from his eyes. Only when the inspectors mentioned that Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had obtained the recognition of the Great Empress Mystic Realm, as well as them inheriting a portion of the Great Empress inheritance, did his expression change. The black-robed Sacred Ambassador muttered to himself as he turned around and began walking back towards the deep recesses of the Grand Hall. Seeing the black-robed Sacred Ambassador taking his leave, the two inspectors said with their knees still on the ground, "Lord Sacred Ambassador, over the past few years, the Desolate race has already begun preparations. They have unsealed several of the seals in the ancient divine tomb. The former Desolate Queen has also relinquished her position to a new Desolate Queen. They have probably summoned their sacred spirit. We are bound to have a war with them. What should we do? The Desolate race? Summoning their sacred spirit?" The black-robed Sacred Ambassador stopped in his steps and said coldly, "We do not need to do a thing. We just need to wait." The black-robed Sacred Ambassador sneered. His gaze seemed to penetrate the Grand Black Hall as it extended past the entire Tian Yuan world, all the way to the red untraversable sea. The seawater of the calm untraversable sea that resembled death turned redder the farther one went. It was unknown when 7 mountain peaks had suddenly appeared out of empty and endless untraversable sea, which was impossible for a great emperor to cross. These 7 pure black mountain peaks stood erect like black giants. However, if one looked carefully, one would discover that a few of the mountain peaks resembled human forms, especially the one in the middle. It looked like a man, dressed in black battle armor with his hands seemingly holding a lance. In contrast with the calm seawater, at the foot of these divine mountains, a dark red vortex formed. The untraversable sea was experiencing something different from the Tian Yuan world, which was still experiencing daytime. Above the 7 mountain peaks was a clean-washed night sky with flickering starlight. The vast star-filled galactic arm spread across the sky, shining, together with the moonlight, onto the black stone mountain peak. The light seemed like countless blades that were polishing the fuzzy black armor on the man, making its texture turn clearer. A few billion miles away, the black-robed man in the Martial Alliance's Grand Hall seemed to witness this scene. The corners of his mouth began to suffuse a deep smile. The black-armored demon gods were about to awaken. The black-armored demon gods were indestructible and had unlimited strength. Millions of years ago, the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress had failed to completely destroy them. When the 7 black-armored demon gods were reborn, nothing in this world could stop them. The black-armored demon god mountains in the untraversable sea permeated a murderous atmosphere that could cause chaos in the world, but at this moment, the face of a black-armored demon god was just an image in the disc array that Yi Yun was holding. Ever since Yi Yun obtained the disc array from the first level of the God Advent Tower, he had been constantly trying to further his insights up to now. The sword attack that the Azure Yang Lord used to defeat the black-armored warrior was filled with endless charm. Previously, Yi Yun had laid the necessary foundations for this attack at the Pure Yang Sword Palace. He had managed to see some of the charm of this sword attack, but it still could not compare with the present him. After Yi Yun began to cultivate in the Great Empress Heart Sutra, he started to gain even more insight every time he studied this sword attack. Outside the Great Empress mystic realm, there was already a rising wind foreboding the coming storm. Although Yi Yun did not know what had happened outside, he could faintly feel that a large calamity was about to come. Chapter 544, 5 Years. The moon and the sun alternated shifts as time passed. The storm caused by the Great Empress mystic realm had been made known throughout the Tian Yuan world. When people heard of the 6 realms ranking of geniuses by the ancient Great Empress, they knew that the children of heaven from the various large factions were just broken halberds buried in the sand when placed in the Great Empress mystic realm. And under this situation, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong, who came from the Lin family, managed to obtain the Great Empress inheritance. The Great Empress inheritance was no trifling matter. All the large factions coveted it, but they were helpless about it. After the Great Empress trials ended, they could not even get through the door. As for the Lin family, they had long since distanced themselves from Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. It would not be wise for anyone to attack the Lin family. In this way, the seasons changed, and slowly, there were a lot fewer family clans who were still coveting the Great Empress mystic realm. Only the Shintu family clan, who were still brooding about it, would constantly send their family clan's legendary figures to the untraversable sea for patrols, hoping that they would find traces of Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. However, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had seemed to vanish. Many people believed that they would remain in reclusion in the Great Empress mystic realm for a few decades. It was unknown how powerful they would be when they finally came out. Year after year, 5 years had now passed since the Great Empress mystic realm's trials ended. To warriors, 5 years was not a long period of time, but it was enough to make them slowly forget some things. For example, the gigantic eye of destruction that had suddenly appeared in the eternal whirlpool, which made one's soul feel like collapsing just by facing it. As time passed, the fear many large factions in the Tian Yuan world had for the eye slowly diminished. After all, the God Burial Abyss was synonymous with mystery. The strange phenomena that appeared from it was not something unacceptable. From the looks of it, the eye did not seem likely to exit the eternal whirlpool, so it was unlikely for it to affect their foundations in the Tian Yuan world. However, for Yi Yun, 5 years was a long period of time. He was, after all, still young. His life had just begun. For a young elite, 5 years was enough to make his strength progress greatly. This year, Yi Yun turned 21 years old. He had cultivated diligently for 5 years, but his progress in his cultivation level was not fast. His cultivation level was only at the peak of the middle stages of the Dao Seed realm. He was just one step short of entering the late stages of the Dao Seed realm. The reason why his cultivation level progressed slowly was not because Yi Yun wanted to strengthen or consolidate his foundation. Yi Yun believed that even if he had reached the peak of the Dao Seed at the age of 21, he would still have a perfect foundation. The reason why Yi Yun's cultivation level was slow to progress was because he was using most of the time to study the Great Empress Heart Sutra, as well as the Sword Tao of the Azure Yang Lord. The Great Empress Heart Sutra was, after all, a supreme technique that was derived from the Yang God Manual and the 9 Nether Sacred Manual. To reach the large success stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra, they needed complementary Yin Yang to cultivate 9 Yang spiritual energy that had life. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong used their extremely compatible bodies to master the first stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra quickly, but it was no longer that easy to cultivate the second stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra. To give life to their Yuan Qi, they needed to transform the pure Yang energy into 9 Yang spiritual energy, while the pure Yin energy had to transform into Jade Marrow spiritual energy. Their bodies not only needed great affinity with energy, they also had to have the insight and opportunities to do so. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong were not lacking in terms of perceptivity. However, opportunities were not easily chanced upon. This needed their energy to obtain a trace of spiritual consciousness that could not be obtained from searching for it. After Yi Yun and Lin Xintong gained 9 Yang spiritual energy and Jade Marrow spiritual energy, they could begin cultivating the third stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra. As for the third stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra, it was even harder to master. It even needed Yi Yun and Lin Xintong to really become as one. Their bodies had a natural attraction to each other. The more they cultivated, the more spiritual their Yuan Qi became. Then, when they finally made the final step, the benefits they obtained would be greater. At this moment, Yi Yun was suspended above the lava pool, one of his legs folded while the other was tiptoeing on the red lotus which was floating on the lava pool's surface. He was respirating pure Yang energy. As for Lin Xintong, she was sitting cross-legged on the frost ice bed. She was working in concert with Yi Yun from far. Yin and Yang energies were circulating between their bodies. Yi Yun raised his arms gently as 2 blobs of Yuan Qi, one gold and one blue, began to transform around his body. This was pure Yin and pure Yang energy. Loning did not lead to birth and solitude Yang did not allow growth. In the past 5 years, Yi Yun had already started cultivating both Yin and Yang. The 2 blobs of Yuan Qi transformed. The pure Yang energy was clearly more powerful than the pure Yin energy. It sometimes transformed into a golden crow, at other times, a flood dragon. It could even become a black turtle, a flying dragon snake, a fierce tiger, and eagle. The creatures that appeared were a depiction of life. The manifestation of Yuan Qi was the first step to forming life. In these 5 years, the radiant sun qi that Yi Yun cultivated from the Taya sacred technique had been completely absorbed and transformed by the Great Empress Heart Sutra as pure Yang energy. It became the basis for nurturing 9 Yang spiritual energy. However, Yi Yun still failed to make that final step. Up to now, Yi Yun had attempted it countless number of times. Usually when such a bottleneck was encountered, going out on a training trip was a good choice. Warriors, especially young elites, could not be content with remain safe. If they continuously trained in reclusion, they would encounter a bottleneck over time. When that happened, a training trip or venturing into a mystic realm would provide them with opportunities that could let them gain insight or have a breakthrough in one fell swoop. Now, this phenomenon has begun to appear after they had remained in reclusion for 5 years. As for Yi Yun and Lin Xintong, they could not leave the Great Empress mystic realm this early. They had to master, at least, the second stage of the Great Empress Heart Sutra. Without being able to travel outside, Yi Yun could only explore inside the God Advent Tower. With the Azure Yang token, Yi Yun could open the God Advent Tower's 2nd level's vast wilderness world, or the 4th level's extreme frost icy plains. He and Lin Xintong had explored these 2 worlds several times, but they did not gain much from it. Today, they came to the 3rd level of the God Advent Tower. The 3rd level of the God Advent Tower was a grand hall filled with cultivation technique manuals. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had previously chosen cultivation techniques in this grand hall, so they had also seen this place before. However, they both stopped in their footsteps when they arrived here today. Oh! This is. In front of them, there were portraits hung on the walls of the Grand Hall. The two portraits had been seen by Yi Yun and Lin Xintong separately. One of them was the Great Empress portrait. The plainly dressed woman in the portrait only revealed her back. Her long hair was disheveled. Her clothes fluttered in the wind as she walked on thin air with the tip of her barefooted toes. And below her feet was a vast extreme frost icy plains. With every step the simply dressed woman made, an ice lotus would bloom under her foot. As for the other portrait, it was that of the Azure Yang Lord. The Azure Yang Lord was sitting on the ground, with his back leaning against a tree. One of his hands was holding a wine gourd. He was gulping down wine. Beside him, his sword was stabbed into the ground diagonally. The blade of the sword was even stained with blood. The two portraits, with one beautiful and the other unruly. It gave off a strange feeling when they were placed together. Upon seeing these two portraits, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong suddenly thought of something. At this moment, they had a different feeling. Chapter 545, Previous and Present Life, 1. The strokes that were used in the ancient Great Empress portrait were exquisite and precise. The portrait's style was aesthetically beautiful. It looked like it was sculpted bit by a peerless and talented woman's meticulous techniques. As for the strokes that were used in the Azure Yang Lord's portrait, they were rough and broad. The portrait style was unruly, like it was drawn by a licentious painting master who drew it haphazardly after a few drinks. The two painting styles stood in contrast, and it was clear that they were drawn by different people. After entering the God Advent Tower, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had seen these two portraits. Back then, they could feel the charm behind their respective portraits, and they sat in front of them to ponder, gaining a lot of insight as a result. However, today, after Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had cultivated the Great Empress Heart Sutra, seeing these two portraits again gave them a completely different feeling. Yi Yun felt that the two portraits were most likely drawn by the ancient Great Empress and Azure Yang Lord themselves respectively. The paint strokes contained the laws that they cultivated. As Yi Yun looked at them, he subconsciously became engrossed into them and he went into a trance. He then saw a scene of the vast untraversable sea, with the Azure Yang Lord flying through the air, with sword in hand. The Azure Yang Lord held a wine gourd in one hand and a sword in the other. He slashed at a black-armored warrior, causing a chi beam to flash past the sky. This time, the scene Yi Yun saw was much more lifelike than the scenes he saw in the disc array. It was as if the scene was happening before his very eyes. It was really an attack that split the seas, annihilating both demons and gods. However, just as Yi Yun was silently trying to gain insight into the sword attack, very suddenly, the Azure Yang Lord, who had killed the black-armored warrior, seemed to suddenly sense something and looked backwards. He was looking straight at Yi Yun. Then, he erupted into laughter that resounded through the world. This was a scene not seen in the disc array at all. And this glance of his made Yi Yun feel distraught and his mind went blank. The untraversable sea in front of him turned blurry. His thoughts seemed to be transported through infinite spacetime, retracing the rivers of history, until he reached a mysterious world. In an ancient divine kingdom, there was a grandiose palace that towered above the clouds. The walls of the palace were lined with pictures of the sun, moon, and stars. It exuded a stately and dignified aura. In a square in front of the palace, a troop of golden-armored guards lined two sides of a road. They remained motionless like a series of golden towers. They exuded a domineering aura. Yi Yun came to this strange world abruptly. The sudden change that resulted in this new scene alarmed Yi Yun greatly. Ignoring the magnificent palace, just the guards of the palace made him stagger. The strength of these guards was unfathomable. However, strangely, these guards appeared oblivious to Yi Yun's appearance. At this moment, there was a dragon's roar. Yi Yun turned to see 12 flood dragons pulling a jade spirit airship. The spirit airship slowly stopped and 4 palace maidens pulled the curtain open. A beautiful woman carried a baby in swaddling clothes and walked out slowly. This baby was plump, and in his bright eyes, One could see an endless glow flashing in them. It was clear that he was extremely intelligent. Upon seeing this baby, Yi Yun was stunned. He felt that the baby's demeanor was somewhat similar to his. He even had a feeling that he was the baby. Why am I seeing these scenes? Yi Yun was like a bystander as he quietly watched the magnificent scenes go by. The ancient palace, the powerful guards, and the flood dragons that pulled a spirit airship. Finally, there was a peerless, beautiful woman who carried a baby in her arms. It was easy to tell at a glance that this was a divine empire and a land of gods. Be it the woman or the baby she held in her arms, they were both of noble birth. They were figures blessed by the heavens. Yi Yun felt like he was experiencing another life of himself. This situation resembled the experiences of the mental demon trial. A different life cycle gave him different thoughts. Congratulations to His Sacred Majesty. The 12th prince was born accompanied by a purple misted sky. He has a perfect pure yang body. His constitution is extremely gifted, and he is fated to have spectacular achievements in the future. Due to His Sacred Majesty's wisdom, our great Qin dynasty is experiencing a golden age. Now our empire at its most powerful point, with tributes sent from everywhere. Now, the various princes and their sons and daughters are esteemed talents amongst people. Now with the 12th prince revealing inklings of being a saint, our great Qin dynasty is bound to be illustrious in the future. The chaotic voices from the officials rang in Yi Yun's ear. Yi Yun had been transformed into the baby in the woman's arms. He was watching the world through the eyes of the baby. In the grand hall, on the throne high above, there was a dignified man. His looks were a bit fuzzy. His body exuded a majestic aura that was as brilliant as the radiant sun. It made people unable to look straight at him. At this moment, the man laughed. He was very pleased with the birth of the 12th prince. Clearly, he had high hopes for this child. As time passed, the child began to slowly grow. Yi Yun is slowly transformed from being a bystander to being child. He experienced the child's life, and he watched the world from the child's perspective. He accompanied the child as he cultivated on the martial path and gained nomological insights. No matter what cultivation technique it was, he could memorize and easily understand them. The great Qin dynasty had numerous outstanding talents. They were all earth-shattering and extremely powerful figures. They took turns to give the child pointers and gave him all the aid they could. The child's strength increased very quickly. At the same age, he far exceeded extremely powerful people. People only spoke highly of him. From his birth to growth, and to his martial arts practicing, it was smooth sailing for this child. He was undoubtedly leading a charmed life. Slowly, he grew up. He had a forthright attitude and he reveled in a bohemian lifestyle. He befriended heroes all around the world and he was praised by all. The position of the sacred emperor of the great Qin dynasty was not hereditary. Since ancient times, it was passed to the most capable person. However, as the 12th prince was too outstanding, the position of the sacred emperor was naturally his. As such, the ruling sacred emperor abdicated his throne for someone more capable and he went into reclusive cultivation. The 12th prince inherited the throne and he became the youngest monarch of the great Qin dynasty in history. On the 10th year after he became the sacred emperor, he met a woman like it was written in the stars. She was a peerless woman who was beyond rebuff. She appeared in the great Qin dynasty like a bright moon. She had both beauty and brains. Her background was not stunning. She came from a small sect, but this made it even more impressive. It was simply unbelievable for a young girl to have such talent, coming from a small sect. That year, the 12th prince was at the peak of his life. He helmed an ancient country and he was all-powerful and highly spirited. He was matchless against peers his age. Daughters of heaven that usually rebuffed others ended up chasing him, but he was never smitten by them. It was only until he met her that he was smitten, that girl that was as beautiful as the bright moon. Her name was Bai Yuan. She was different from those girls. Her mundane background gave her an indescribable charm. She was quiet and thoughtful. She did not have a shred of arrogance in her. Instead, she always had a smile that resembled the warm spring on her face. He began discussing martial arts with her. Bai Yuan's knowledge and understanding of martial arts greatly surprised him. After all, she came from an ordinary background. It was very rare for someone like her to have such knowledge. This way, he subconsciously fell in love with Bai Yuan deep down. Chapter 546, Previous and Present Life, 2. After several years of courting, the 12th prince finally became a couple with Bai Yuan. Soon after, a grand marriage ceremony was held. The marriage ceremony was spectacular. The great Qian capital held a feast for 12 days. Ancient countries and divine sects from all over the world sent envoys to send their congratulations. There were numerous elites, and this grandeur prevailed for some time. After the marriage, the 12th prince and Bai Yuan devoted themselves to martial arts. Bai Yuan was limited by her origins, so even though she was an amazing genius, she was constrained by resources and inheritance. However, after tying the knot with the 12th prince, they were no longer a problem. Bai Yuan could learn the best heritage and enjoy the best resources possible. Even the small sect that Bai Yuan originally came from developed astoundingly. It eventually became the #1 sect in the Great Qian dynasty. Bai Yuan was extremely talented in martial arts. After making up for her lack of inheritance and resources, her strength increased by leaps and bounds. Soon, she was a daughter of heaven who was without match against peers her own age. Eventually, her cultivation level was not much worse than the 12th prince. She and the 12th prince would occasionally spar against each other, so they progressed together and their cultivation levels increased at a rapid pace. Shortly after that, the two were given the titles Sacred Emperor and Sacred Empress. One of them was unconventional and unrestrained, as he helmed the ancient country, while the other was modest and open-minded, as she was like a mother to the country. The both of them were not only astonishingly powerful, they were also wise and astute. They were praised by the people. Later on, at a martial tea session organized by several ancient countries, the Sacred Emperor and Empress attended the event. Their peerless and astounding strength impressed everyone at the tea session, as they displayed the Great Qian country's absolute sovereignty. At this moment, people believed that the 12th prince had reached his life's peak. And in fact, things that happened later caught people unaware. Several years later, when the 12th prince and Bai Yuan traveled together, they entered a sinkhole mystic realm. Space was in chaos in there. Many elites had fallen there. It was a place many powerful figures in the world did not dare to enter. The 12th prince had always been prideful and uninhibited. He moved in the sinkhole as he wished, worrying his convoy. Under these circumstances, something out of the blue happened as spacetime went into chaos in the sinkhole. It caused the 12th prince to be separated from his convoy. This terrified his subordinates. They searched for him to no avail. This lasted for 2 years, but they still failed to find him. They had no choice but to leave some people behind to stay guard, as they returned to the Great Qian country. This unexpected turn of events separated Bai Yuan and the 12th prince. After Bai Yuan returned to the country, she took care of the Great Qian country using her status as Sacred Empress. The entire country remained in good shape. Everyone commended Bai Yuan on her ability to undertake this responsibility despite being a woman. It was a blessing that the Great Qian country had a Sacred Empress like her. But even so, the disappearance of the Sacred Emperor made the citizens worried. As such, 20 years passed. Everyone believed that the Sacred Emperor had died in the sinkhole mystic realm. However, as people began to get used to the lack of a Sacred Emperor, he returned. Not only did he return alive, he returned with his cultivation level increased by leaps and bounds. He had managed to find a stunning treasure as well as 2 supreme Great Tao remnant manuals in an ancient ruins in the sinkhole. He had mastered a tiny portion of these two supreme Great Tao Remnant manuals. This caused his strength to have a qualitative leap. It could be said that it was his destiny to defy the heavens. With the sacred emperor's return, the whole country celebrated. However, before people could set up the banquets to celebrate, they received some sensational news that shocked the entire country. In the Central State Divine Territory, an older generation Divine Lord was near his death. Before he died, according to the Divine Territory's regulations, the next Divine Lord of the Great World had to be decided. All the citizens of the Central State Divine Territory were qualified to become a Great World's Divine Lord regardless of their age or sex. They just needed to meet the requisite power requirements and to not have done heinous acts. When the Sacred Emperor heard of the news, he was already heading towards the Central State to vie for the position of the Great World's Divine Lord. A Great World's Divine Lord held a Divine Lord's mark. They were legendary existences. Although the Great Qian Empire had been established for a long period of time and had controlled vast territories with billions of people under its wing, it had never produced a Great World's Divine Lord. An empire that was bigger than the Great Qian country by tens or hundreds of times was needed. Furthermore, it needed the country's luck to accumulate to an extreme before there was a minute chance of that happening. Although everyone in the Great Qian country felt admiration and loved their sacred emperor, very few were optimistic about his vying for the position of the Great World's Divine Lord. It was too difficult. Those competing with the sacred emperor were peerless elites. They were figures that far exceeded their comprehension. As they were concerned about their sacred emperor, many citizens traveled to the Central State Divine Territory. They wanted to witness the full glory of the event. However, the competition of a Great World's Divine Lord was mysterious and grand. Ordinary people had no chance to come into contact with it. The people who stayed around the Central State Divine Territory only saw the sky light up. There was endless heaven-earth yuan qi flowing in the skies, forming gigantic waves. It enshrouded the Central State, as if a terrible battle had appeared in the sky over the ancient country. This battle lasted for more than 10 days and nights. The battle was in a state of chaos and darkness. The people didn't know the state of the battle. They only knew that on the 13th day, their sacred emperor had returned. He was wearing a long tattered gown. He stood alone between the heavens and earth with his sword alone. He had won. He had been victorious against his numerous competitors and he had obtained the position of the next Great World's Divine Lord. Throughout the Great Qian country, people cheered as they seethed with excitement. From then on, he was no longer the sacred emperor of the Grand Qian country. He was also the Central State Divine Territory's Great World's Divine Lord, Azure Yang Lord. His surname was Jian, Sword, and after becoming the Azure Yang Lord, people called him Jian Xingyang, Sword Azure Yang. A country's sacred emperor as well as a Great World's Divine Lord. He held the Divine Lord Royal Seal. At this point, Jian Xingyang's life had reached his highest point. However, the position of a Great World's Divine Lord also implied a great challenge. In ancient times, after the ancestor gods, who controlled the heavenly Tao, were annihilated, the heavenly Tao laws which crumbled into nothingness permeated throughout the 12 empyrean heavens. These great Tao laws spontaneously formed the supreme Tao mark. Every empyrean heaven had 72 Tao marks. They were controlled by the 72 Great World Divine Lords and they were also known as the Divine Lord Royal Seals. By refining a Divine Lord Royal Seal into one's body, one would obtain matchless strength. The power of the same genius with and without the Divine Lord Royal Seal was highly disparate. And the higher one's cultivation level went, the harder it was to improve it. The gap between two martial arts realms was usually a chasm that was impossible to cross. The Divine Lord Royal Seal made others envious. At the same time, people also found out that Jian Xingyang had managed to find a treasure and 2 supreme remnant copies of an inheritance in the sinkhole. The 2 inheritance were the Yang God Manual and the 9 Nether Sacred Manual. The 2 inheritance were extremely remarkable. In the 12 empyrean heavens, every empyrean heaven had its own supreme great Tao. That was something predestined, or it could be said to be a heavenly Tao law. Every law had a divine canon that approached a heavenly Tao. Rumor has it that the 12 divine canons were created by the 12 primordial powers who created the 12 empyrean heavens. There were also rumors that the 12 divine canons were condensed after endless amounts of time after a primordial ancestor god died. People were more inclined to the latter, that the 12 divine canons were the result of the condensation of the heaven and earth great Tao. No matter which one was correct, the preciousness of a divine canon was indubitable. Chapter 547, Sword Tip. Jian Xingyang had a great treasure on hand, along with 2 remnant copies of ancient manuals. He also controlled the Divine Lord Royal Seal. Hence, there were many people who eyed his treasures and position. Jian Xingyang was always open-minded. He was unrestrained by conventions and he dedicated himself in the pursuit of martial arts. He also befriended heroes from all around the world. Towards friends, he was generous and he would help them without needing anything in return. Against enemies, he was firm and resolute in killing them. He never went soft and he would slaughter them without hesitation. Time proved Jian Xingyang's strength. It also proved that he had the ability to hold on to the position of Azure Young Lord. Slowly, the number of people who challenged Jian Xingyang decreased. Correspondingly, the people who dared challenge him were also stronger. Finally, one day, a peerless figure came to the Central State Divine Territory. The Central State was a territory of the human race, but the person challenging Jian Xingyang was from the Fey race. He was from the Western Seas and he was well known in the Western Seas as a figure who would one day become a Fey god. In the 12 empyrean heavens, the human race and the Fey race did not have a harmonious relationship. Throughout history, they had large-scale wars. Although the 2 races were now largely at peace, there were always minor conflicts. As for the position of a great world's divine lord, it was not restricted to anyone from the human or Fey race. The person with the necessary power would obtain the recognition of the heavens and earth, allowing the person to be in command of the Divine Lord Royal Seal. The Divine Lord Royal Seal was a symbol of racial pride. Now, a peerless figure from the Fey race had arrived in the land of humans, with a bid to take the Divine Lord Royal Seal away, so how could the human race endure this? When Jian Xingyang received the news, his eyes blazed with fighting spirit as he felt an indescribable sense of excitement. He had heard of the peerless figure who came from the Fey race. His name was Sha Hongxue*. He given this name because of his red hair. He had a mane of beautiful red hair which were intermixed with several silver threads. Sha Hongxue was extremely famous amongst the Fey race in the Western Seas. If he was described by a sentence, it would be, "I'm most eccentric in millenniums." He was an absolute eccentric. In fact, Jian Xingyang was also an eccentric. However, despite being eccentric, he was a straightforward person who liked to befriend people. He was also approachable to his citizens. On the other hand, Sha Hongxue was different. He was eccentric to the bone, which made him devoid of friends. Even the Fey race geniuses of the Western Seas were nothing in his eyes. Very soon, the eccentric Sha Hongxue did something that was extremely consistent with his character. This peerless figure of the Fey race stood on the tallest divine mountain in the Central State Divine Territory and made his challenge that contained pure yang laws. When he finished writing the challenge proposal, gold beams shone as the text flew downwards, forming words that spanned hundreds of thousands of miles. It extended across the entire sky of the Central State Divine Territory. The contents of the challenge specified that the Fey race was challenging the human race. The time and location of the battle was specified clearly. Numerous citizens of the entire Central State Divine Territory saw the challenge spread out across the sky. Immediately, the news proliferated rapidly. This peerless figure of the Fey race was too arrogant. In many ancient countries of the Central State, countless numbers of human elites were furious. They found Xia Hongxue extremely arrogant because he was a Fey race member who challenged them at their doorstep with the text sprawled across the sky of the central state. He even wanted to bring the Divine Lord Royal Seal back to the Fey race, and that was completely unacceptable. In the central state Divine Palace, Jian Xingyang saw it all. The fighting spirit in his eyes grew in intensity. He was an extremely confident person. The more eccentric and powerful the opponent was, the more excited he was. Furthermore, he was about to break through to a completely new realm with the Yang God Manual. His power would increase by leaps and bounds, so it was an opportune time for Xia Hongxue to make his challenge. Jian Xingyang wanted to use Xia Hongxue's blood to write the legend of his invincibility. This upcoming battle attracted numerous unparalleled humans as spectators. It included many giant figures of the Fey race. All of them arrived at the central state. About 1 month before the stipulated date of the battle, there were already a large number of people who had arrived in the central state. Just the number of the famous figures numbered tens of thousands. As for ordinary warriors, the numbers were uncountable. At the same time, Jian Xingyang went into reclusion. Although he was arrogant, it was built on the foundation of his absolute strength. He was never blindly complacent. His opponent was very powerful, and this was a battle was one that he was not allowed to lose. It was the home ground of the human race, with billions of people watching. How was he going to answer to his citizens if he was defeated by someone from the Fey race? Besides, once he lost, he would also lose the Divine Lord Royal Seal. From then on, the central state divine territory would lose control of the seat of a great world's divine lord. It would be taken over by the Western Sea's Fey race. It would be an absolute disgrace to the central state divine territory as well as to the human race. Jian Xingyang was determined not to let the Divine Lord Royal Seal be lost by him. This battle could be said to be the most important battle in his entire life. However, Jian Xingyang did not believe that he would lose. It was almost a done deal that he would break through to the next realm of the Yang God Manual, because, back at the Sinkhole Mystic Realm, other than the Yang God Manual and the 9 Nether Sacred Manual, he had obtained a great treasure. It was a broken sword. To be precise, it was a tip of a sword. This sword tip was about a foot long. It was rusted and it looked like a piece of junk. However, from Jian Xingyang's insight into the sword Tao and the pure Yang laws, he recognized the sword tip to be something extraordinary. The reason why he remained in the Sinkhole Mystic Realm for 2 decades was not only to gain insight into the Yang God Manual, it was also to use this sword tip to gain sword Tao insights. Now, be it his sword Tao or pure Yang laws, he had reached an absolutely exceptional realm. If he made the breakthrough this time, his strength would reach unimaginable heights. When that happened, no matter how strong or eccentric Xia Hongxue was, he would not be his match. The Divine Lord Royal Seal would be destined to remain in the central state, and the great Qin dynasty. It would remain in the hands of Jian Xingyang. As such, after Jian Xingyang accepted the challenge, he chose to go into reclusive training. Under the immense pressure of the battle, he wanted to use it as an opportunity for him to break through. To ensure that he would succeed in his breakthrough, Sacred Empress Bai Yueyin went into reclusion together with Jian Xingyang, so as to aid his breakthrough to the final realm. Jian Xingyang's cultivation was initially not very smooth, but thanks to Bai Yueyin's help, in which she gathered endless amounts of pure Yang energy, she managed to aid Jian Xingyang's control of Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi. He and Bai Yueyin had been together for a long time and they had cultivated together all along. Bai Yueyin's understanding of his martial cultivation was as good as his. About 3 days before the battle, Jian Xingyang's cultivation reached a critical moment. At this moment, his insight into the pure Yang laws had reached an extreme. He entered an ethereal state in which he was in no way to be disturbed. However, as he was tightly sealed in a cultivation chamber, and with Bai Yueyin's protecting him, Jian Xingyang had no worries about such things. Jian Xingyang sat in the central state divine palace's chamber, while completely focused without any distractions. Pure Yang energy was spewing out from his pores, and after every complete circulation, he would absorb it back into his body. The entire chamber was shimmering with divine light. Jian Xingyang had a serene expression as he closed his eyes tightly. He could feel that he was about to break through at any moment. He just needed to accomplish it in one concerted effort. However, he never expected that at the moment he was making his breakthrough. Cha! A soft reverberation of a sword slash echoed. Jian Xingyang, who was in an ethereal state, nearly did not hear it. When he sensed the sword chi coming at him, the feeling of pain had already come surging like a tidal wave from his chest. At the most critical moment of his life, a cold sword had been sent straight through his chest. He was in no way prepared for this. He wasn't even completely aware of it. And as such, a sword pierced through his chest. Jian Xingyang opened his eyes in disbelief. Pure yang energy exploded out of his body, tearing apart his clothes and skin and created chaos in the chamber. The energy in his body went into disarray as it burst through his meridians, causing blood to spurt out of his mouth. And in the midst of this chaotic energy flow, standing before Jian Xingyang was that familiar figure. Her hair was fluttering in the wind as she revealed her ice-cold but moon-like beautiful face. It was one which he was extremely familiar with, but yet, it now looked no different than that of a stranger. The woman he had held on to countless numbers of times was holding a sword. And the other end of the sword had already appeared behind his back, right through his heart. Bai Yueyin, his wife, actually ended his life at his most critical moment? The airflow in the chamber remained turbulent. He sat there completely bloodied. However, Jian Xingyang did not seem to hear the thundering sounds, nor did he feel the pain his body was experiencing. In his eyes, all he saw was the cold eyes of Bai Yueyin. He only saw her sword being slowly pulled out of his heart. As her sword was pulled out, Jian Xingyang seemed to feel that his soul was being repeatedly extracted by the sword. Suddenly, he reached out his hand and grabbed the sword's blade that was stained with the blood from his heart. His lips trembled as blood constantly flowed out. Why? Jian Xingyang's voice was trembling. He felt like he was having a nightmare at that very moment, but it was a dream that he could not wake up from. He desperately wanted to know the reason. Even in death, he also wanted to know the reason. Why did she stab her sword at him? But, the absolutely beautiful white-dressed woman did not say a single word. Sha Hongshua's name, Hongshua literally means red snow, which reflects his hair color. Chapter 548, The End of Brilliance. The blade cut through his flesh and the resulting pain was excruciating. However, it was far from the pain that Jian Xingyang felt from the bottom of his heart. At that moment, Jian Xingyang felt that his world had completely shattered. His pride, his unrestrained life and his infinitely glorious martial future were all gone. Everything was completely smashed into pieces with that attack. He was always highly spirited, and he never knew grief, but now the corner of his eyes cracked as if his soul was slowly leaving his mortal shell. He grabbed the sword tightly, while his palm bled profusely from the cut. Why? Tell me why. He continued repeating his words. The white-dressed woman looked at Jian Xingyang. Her lips moved slightly, as if she had something to say, but eventually, all she did was let out a sigh. She. The sword was pulled out fully, resulting in a spray of blood. The blood splattered on Bai Yueyin's white clothes like blossoming plums. From the beginning to the end, Bai Yueyin did not say a word. Jian Xingyang fell to the ground as blood pooled around him. With his power, even with the sword having pierced through his heart, and him suffering the wanton surge of the pure yang energy in his body that destroyed a large number of his meridians, he still did not completely lose his combat power. However, at this moment, he had forgotten to heal himself. He had led a high and mighty life, and he had never met his match. He might have mused of the idea of him collapsing under the sword of an enemy, but he never believed that when the day came, the person who stabbed him was the woman he loved the most. Bai Yueyin left. She did not continue attacking the severely injured Jian Xingyang. She took with her that rusted sword tip, but she did not take Jin Xingyang's interspatial ring. In Jin Xingyang's interspatial ring, there were the Yang God Manual and 9 other sacred manual remnant manuals. Jin Xingyang watched helplessly as Bai Yueyin deactivated the restrictions as she exited the chamber. From the beginning to the end, he was completely distracted out of his wits. He did not say another word, nor did he stop her. He was like a complete fool. Bai Yueyin took that mysterious sword tip with her, but she could not have done such a ruthless act to him just for that sword tip. This was because Jin Xingyang was willing to share everything with Bai Yueyin, be it the Yang God Manual, the 9 Nether Sacred Manual, or that mysterious sword tip. In fact, up until today, Bai Yueyin had already seen the Yang God Manual and 9 Nether Sacred Manual remnants. She had already memorized the 2 Supreme Great Das. As for the sword tip, if Bai Yueyin wanted to gain insight from it, Jin Xingyang would give it to her without any hesitations. And if Bai Yueyin really wanted to take possession of the sword tip, she could have taken the sword tip and take flight. Furthermore, if Bai Yueyin requested for it, Jin Xingyang could even gift the sword tip to her. She absolutely had no need to do so. Jin Xingyang was unable to figure it out. He seemed to be completely dazed as he sat in the chamber for 3 days and nights. Blood stained the ground. Jin Xingyang was obsessed to know why Bai Yueyin had done so. It made him go crazy. No one in the entire Central State knew of the events in the chamber. Neither did they know that the Sacred Empress had left the Central State, disappearing without a trace. Such a shocking turn of events could not change certain things. Jin Xingyang still held his battle of destiny with the Fey race's elite, Sha Hongxue. This battle was an extremely important battle to the human race of the Central State. Even several large human race divine territories neighboring the Central State were concerned about the outcome of this battle. It was a glorious battle between the human and Fey race. To a large extent, it would reveal who was stronger amongst the elites of the human race and the Fey race in the Yang God Emperor in heaven. Jin Xingyang sat in the chamber until the day of the battle. He could not miss the battle, even though his meridians had not completely recovered, and having failed in his breakthrough. However, he still had to face the battle challenge. He had already lost the woman he loved the most in his life, so he could not lose his martial path. At Wanchur Mountain, the venue of the battle, Jin Xingyang and Sha Hongxue hovered high in the sky as they faced each other. Under the eyes of many, Sha Hongxue drew out a long saber. The handle was as long as a lower arm, and it was made up of a grayish-white spinal bone. The saber was thin and long, and it looked like a long blood-colored leaf blade. The battle began. Before the battle, Jin Xingyang had suffered greatly both physically and mentally. However, when the battle began, he had completely changed to another person. In his eyes, there was only fighting spirit and his opponent. This battle was earth-shattering. Vast swaths of land were reduced to canyons by the saber and sword chi. Snow-capped mountains that pierced through the clouds melted into piles of sand under the pure yang energy. The battle was extremely intense, but the final result was the defeat of the Azure Yang Lord. His body was penetrated by Sha Hongxue's 12 slashes of the saber as his blood stained the sky. With his powers exhausted and his meridians blocked, Jin Xingyang slammed heavily to the ground. A former invincible legend, a former Great Qian dynasty's legendary person of the Central State Divine Territory had fallen in such a manner. He had lost, and it was a crushing defeat. He had also lost his future. The first half of his life was one of high-spiritedness and heroism. He controlled great power and overwhelmed the world with his strength. He was admired by countless heroes and he had numerous women falling for him. However, all of this went down the drain with his defeat in battle. Sha Hongxue did not kill Jin Xingyang. Instead, he spared him. However, Jin Xingyang's future was already bleak. The citizens of the Central State were extremely disappointed with the battle outcome. Heroes that rushed to the Central State could only sigh. As for the mighty figures of the Fey race, they only issued derision. As for the Fey race elite, Sha Hongxue, he was high-spirited and he looked down at Jin Xingyang in the form of a victor. A dismissive smile appeared on his face. So what if I spare your cheap life? You can challenge me at any time. As for the distance between us, it will only grow further. As Sha Hongxue said this, he gored through Jin Xingyang's chest and made a sudden pull. With the soft sound of bone and flesh tearing, Jin Xingyang felt his body tremble greatly. An excruciating pain assaulted his senses, as if his heart had been pulled out by Sha Hongxue. His face was as white as a sheet as he looked powerlessly at Sha Hongxue. At this moment, Sha Hongxue was holding a bloody metallic mark. It was the Divine Lord Royal Seal condensed from pure Yang Heavenly Tao. The Divine Lord Royal Seal that Jin Xingyang had refined into his body had now been forcefully pulled out of his body by Sha Hongxue. Jin Xingyang felt that this pull of Sha Hongxue was like his backbone being ripped out him. The title of Azure Yang Lord shall henceforth be mine. Ha ha ha. Sha Hongxue erupted into a tumultuous laughter. With a wipe of his hand, he injected his perception into the Divine Lord Royal Seal. At the same time, Jin Xingyang's soul seat quaked as he spat out a mouthful of blood. At that moment, the seal he left on the Divine Lord Royal Seal had been forcefully wiped off by Sha Hongxue. From then onwards, the Divine Lord Royal Seal had changed owners. Around the battleground, numerous human race warriors witnessed this scene. They felt their hearts ache as they could only sigh. On the home ground of the human race, they watched helplessly as a Fey race elite took off with the Divine Lord Royal Seal, becoming a great world's Divine Lord. This sense of defeat was imaginable. But there was no one who could stop this scene, as none of them was Sha Hongxue's match. They looked at Jin Xingyang and helplessly shook their heads. With this, a legend had collapsed. Chapter 549, Sealed World. Jin Xingyang was defeated. When a son of heaven appeared in an invincible form, where he defeated opponent after opponent, the countless amounts of praise and worship he accrued would completely collapse the moment he was defeated. People will inevitably say things like Jin Xingyang was not that great after all in private. A person who accomplished nothing all his life would be praised by others whenever he became a hero or accomplished a feat. However, a person who was already a top hero at his peak would only be met with derisive ridicule after being defeated and humiliated. People were accustomed to celebrating a failure's victory, but they could not tolerate a constant winner's failure. Furthermore, Jin Xingyang's defeat was too tragic. He had been defeated by the Fey race, and he has lost the glory that belonged to the human race. Jin Xingyang dragged his wounded body away from the battlefield. As a failure, he could not wash away the humiliation even if he died to atone for his failure. He had lost his position as Azure Yang Lord and his glory. He was severely injured and his meridians were mostly destroyed. His cultivation level had also dropped drastically, and he still needed to endure the betrayal of the woman he loved the most. Jin Xingyang has reached the lowest point in his life. Although he was still the great Qian country's sacred emperor, he never returned to it. He left and wandered alone. In the past, Jin Xingyang had a wide circle of friends, with numerous people receiving favors from him. Cultivation techniques, elixirs, fiefs, cultivation caves. He had given out countless treasures, but after Jin Xingyang's misfortune, the friends from his past subconsciously chose to alienate him. Although, these friends also seemed to express concern for Jin Xingyang, their wandering eyes and repeated words that did not commit to anything made Jin Xingyang realize that it was time for him to leave. When he provided grace to others, he had never expected anything in return. Furthermore, they could not help him either. However, he never expected that the fickleness of human nature would reach such a point. Jin Xingyang did not grieve over this, all he did was sigh. Maybe, his life had been too smooth. It was so smooth that he had lost his way amidst the glory. Only up to then, when he suffered a serious setback, did he jerk awake from his foggy mist. He found a quiet place to meditate and heal himself. His injuries were too severe that even cracks appeared on his Tao foundation. It took him several decades before he managed to join up his broken Dao foundation and meridians. However, his strength failed to restore to its peak. Coming so far, he recalled of a place that allowed him to go so far, the sinkhole. The sinkhole had existed for so long that it could no longer be verified. Legends said that the sinkhole was actually a broken universe. It was a broken world left behind when their present world's nomological ancestor gods were annihilated. It was vast, so vast that it stretched across all 12 Empyrean heavens. In the sinkhole, spacetime was in chaos. Even the strongest figures would easily be lost deep in the sinkhole. However, there were still many warriors of the 12 Empyrean heavens who explored the sinkhole mystic realm as it was too large and too hidden. It existed from primordial times until then, with many reclusive figures opening up immortal caves in the sinkhole. There were plenty of treasures that were nurtured from the absorption of the worldly essence under the sinkhole's exotic environment. Hence, it was very easy to obtain opportunities by adventuring in the sinkhole. Previously, when Jian Xingyang went missing, he had obtained the Young God Manual, the 9 Nether Sacred Manual, and the Broken Sword Tip. Jian Xingyang returned back to the sinkhole, hoping to seek the opportunities he might have missed out upon. However, he never expected that he would end up lost in the chaotic space in the realm. Back then, he was able to exit the mystic realm, but now the laws governing it had changed, so he could no longer find his way back. Getting lost in the sinkhole was extremely dangerous. Since ancient times, unknown numbers of heroic figures from the 12 Empyrean heavens were trapped to death in the sinkhole as they got lost. Jian Xingyang was facing a similar problem, but he did not despair. After experiencing tumultuous ups and downs, Jian Xingyang's attitude was already completely different from before. He searched for an exit in the chaotic space, but he failed to find one. However, he managed to find something that astonished him. It was a world that was sealed. And that world was the world that contained the Tianyuan continent. Yi Yun was following Jian Xingyang's will all the way until this point. At the moment Jian Xingyang crossed into this world's entrance, for some reason, the long dream state abruptly came to an end, waking Yi Yun up from his silence. Yi Yun gasped heavily. He felt a terrible migraine appear as his body was covered in cold sweat. This dream was very long. It was so long that he felt like he was experiencing the life of Jian Xingyang himself. Yang God Manual. 9 Nether Sacred Manual. So those 2 supreme mystic techniques remnant manuals were obtained by Jian Xingyang from the sinkhole. Later on, they were given to the ancient Great Empress, allowing her to create the Great Empress Heart Sutra. And that rusty sword tip. It was immediately apparent to Yi Yun that the broken sword tip that Jian Xingyang had obtained was the other part of the Pure Yang Sword Palace's owner's broken sword. The sword had been broken into 2 pieces. He had obtained the portion with the hilt, while Jian Xingyang obtained the other half. Yi Yun took the broken sword out of his interspatial ring subconsciously. The rust covered the sword, as if it was stained with the blood of gods. This sword was extremely mysterious. After Jian Xingyang obtained the broken sword, he later chanced upon the Tianyuan world. That was clearly not a coincidence. However, Yi Yun never expected that the Tianyuan world was sealed in the sinkhole. A large world was sealed just like that? Yi Yun did not have any idea about the person who sealed this world. He thought of the owner of the Pure Yang Sword Palace. If it was the Pure Yang Sword Palace's owner, then leaving the other half of the broken sword in this sealed world was not surprising. This also explained why Jian Xingyang's sword move in the disc array he obtained in the first level of the God Advent Tower contained the charm of the Pure Yang Sword Palace's owner's attack. Because of the existence of the broken sword, both their sword moves could be said to share the same strain. This also allowed Yi Yun to easily succeed while trying to understand Jian Xingyang's sword move. The Azure Yang Lord sure is a tragic figure. Yi Yun shook his head. As Yi Yun had experienced the Azure Yang Lord's life, the betrayal the Azure Yang Lord experienced as well as the failure in battle against Sha Hongxue were all felt by him. His doom and despair was enough to cause a person with weak will to commit suicide. However, the Azure Yang Lord managed to bear it all. Not only did he do so, a few decades after his recovery, he could even gain enlightenment, returning back to his unrestrained character. Such a hero was rare in this world. However, there was still an obsession the Azure Yang Lord had that he could not let go for life. He wanted to know why Bai Yuan betrayed him. Chapter 550, Daughter of Heaven. Just as Yun was morosely contemplating the Azure Yang Lord's experiences, he inadvertently saw Lin Xintong standing in front of the ancient great empress portrait not far away from him. Her eyes were tightly closed as her eyelashes fluttered. After a long while, she slowly opened her eyes. She had an emotive glint in her eyes. It was like she had just abruptly woken up from a dream. The moment she opened her eyes, she looked around her surroundings before suddenly looking at Yun. Upon seeing Yun's familiar face, Lin Xintong felt slightly relieved. Yun could not help but hold Lin Xintong's hand. "What's the matter?" Lin Xintong looked like she was still immersed in her previous dream. She said, "I saw the ancient great empress as I followed her, experiencing her life." Yun was surprised. Lin Xintong had experienced the same thing he did. He looked at the two portraits and said, "The two portraits might contain the two seniors' will. I also saw the Azure Yang Lord's life." Lin Xintong slowly walked over and stretched out her hand to touch the ancient great empress portrait. The portrait of the great empress walking across the icy plains alone made her sigh. The ancient great empress past and her childhood were very much alike mine. She was really a wonderful woman. Saying that, Lin Xintong slowly described all of the ancient great empress life that she had seen. They both had naturline meridians, so the ancient great empress had also suffered from discrimination in her childhood. She came from a large martial family. The family clan's status in the Tian Yuan world far exceeded the Lin family. It could be said that they were filled with numerous talents and countless elites. Although the ancient great empress was a direct descendant of the family line, it became a tragedy for her to be born in such a family clan with her naturline meridians. A genius destined to die young had no value from the beginning. The ancient great empress understood the fickleness of the world and the fickleness of human nature. Growing up through adversity, her character was like a blooming flower in the snow. She was cold and tough. She never abandoned any hopes to join her terminated meridians up. She left her family clan and traveled everywhere. In a deserted mountain in the vicinity of the untraversable sea, she discovered a grass hut. And in there, she met the Azure Yang Lord who was living in reclusion here. So the Azure Yang Lord lived here in reclusion after arriving in this world. Yun listened carefully. The life of the Azure Yang Lord he experienced ended the moment the Azure Yang Lord entered this world. Now, through Lin Xintong, he found the subsequent events out through the ancient great empress perspective. The entrance that connected the sinkhole to the Tian Yuan world was the eternal whirlpool. When the Azure Yang Lord crossed into this world, he came through the eternal whirlpool. However, after coming to this world, the Azure Yang Lord realized that he had been trapped here. He found it very difficult for him to use the eternal whirlpool to return to the sinkhole. He also found it very difficult to find the path that could lead him back to the 12 Empyrean heavens. The Azure Yang Lord lived in seclusion near to the untraversable sea so as to carry on finding the path back. The horrifying suction power deep in the eternal whirlpool made him believe that it was not easy finding the path back. And even if he could return to the 12 Empyrean heavens, he would end up going in circles in the sinkhole without any way of telling the direction. He slowly searched, refusing to give up. And it was during this time that the Azure Yang Lord met the ancient Great Empress. Back then, the Great Empress was dressed in white, just like in the portrait. She was like a beautiful blooming flower standing alone in the snow. The moment the Azure Yang Lord saw the ancient Great Empress, he could tell that she had naturally terminated meridians. But he could not find any traces of self-pity in her eyes. It was as if this woman would never back down, even if the path ahead was filled with death. Instead, she would use the sword in her hand to open a path up for herself. This unyielding character of hers made the Azure Yang Lord see himself. He also saw an inkling of Bai Yuan's shadow. The Azure Yang Lord cherished talent. Because of this reason, and also because the young Great Empress had some similarity to Bai Yuan, he made the first move to get to know her. He did not know why that he would do so to a girl he met coincidentally in a strange world. He gave her pointers on martial arts and later on, he took her in as a disciple. When the ancient Great Empress first saw this man, she also felt that he was no ordinary person. Later on, the Azure Yang Lord taught her pure Yang cultivation techniques which far exceeded any existing martial arts in the Tian Yuan world. The ancient Great Empress came from a top family clan and she had seen countless numbers of manuals. However, the cultivation techniques taught by the Azure Yang Lord were something she had never heard or seen before. This made her see a glimmer of hope in her still unsuccessful search for a way to join her terminated meridians up. She diligently cultivated, and with her being extremely talented, she advanced rapidly by cultivating the pure Yang cultivation technique. As for the Azure Yang Lord, he was even more amazed. He was originally hoping to have another person to chat with through his life of solitude. But he never expected that a casual action of his resulted in him becoming more and more shocked. The ancient Great Empress was an absolute genius. In the beginning, the Azure Yang Lord only planned on teaching the ancient Great Empress some ordinary cultivation techniques. However, when he saw the ancient Great Empress' unparalleled talent in martial arts, he also began to really guide the ancient Great Empress. It was such a pity for a martial arts genius to end her martial path due to her terminated meridians. In the end, the Azure Yang Lord gave her the Yang God manual that he obtained from the sinkhole. And after the ancient Great Empress mastered it, he taught her the 9 other sacred manual as well. The ancient Great Empress's strength rapidly increased. At the same time he witnessed the ancient Great Empress increase in strength, the Azure Yang Lord felt that his state of mind was gradually changing. It seemed to rediscover the vigor he once had. He slowly rediscovered his past self. Carefree, unbridled, and without restraint. The ancient Great Empress's cultivation level slowly increased to an incredible level. It had already far exceeded the standards of the Tian Yuan world. After a period of time, the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress traveled to the mainland. They toured the mortal realm and witnessed the world changing with time. When the ancient Great Empress' strength exceeded many elites of the Yang God Emperor in heaven, she once again did something that made the Azure Yang Lord absolutely speechless. She managed to create the Great Empress Heart Sutra from the 2 supreme remnant manuals. Maybe it was the naturally terminated meridians that had given her her achievements. Her complete obsession with joining up her terminated meridians allowed her to gain such amazing achievements. The Great Empress Heart Sutra could be said to be a rare treasured manual of the world. The Azure Yang Lord had always led a proud life. He originally believed that a woman who could amaze him was only to Bai Yuan. He never expected that in his life, he would see a woman who exceeded Bai Yuan. The ancient Great Empress's mental temperament, talent and tenacious character deeply moved the Azure Yang Lord. As for the Azure Yang Lord's openness and strong sense of righteousness, he opened the closed heart of the ancient Great Empress. The two of them kept each other company like a pair of immortal couples. It was an envious affair. However, in the Azure Yang Lord's heart, he still had an obsession. He still wanted to return to the 12 Empyrean heavens. He wanted to regain the glory that was once his. He wanted to ask Bai Yuan why she had betrayed him. It was like a knot in his heart. If he did not untie it, the Azure Yang Lord would never feel at ease. As such, the Azure Yang Lord explored the eternal whirlpool several times in search of the return path to the sinkhole. He joined hands with the ancient Great Empress as they explored deeper and deeper. Slowly, the Azure Yang Lord discovered that in the eternal whirlpool, there was an ancient enchantment. This enchantment was extremely hidden, but the enchantment contained an extremely powerful energy. This energy did not seem like it was formed naturally. If it was created by a mysterious person, then the strength of this mysterious person, who could leave such an energy behind, made the Azure Yang Lord secretly alarmed. The Azure Yang Lord found it hard to believe that such a figure would appear in a tiny world with a low level of martial arts. What was his purpose here? Could he have come from the 12 Empyrean heavens, and had entered this place by accident while exploring the sinkhole? This thought made the Azure Yang Lord feel a sense of rapport with the person. He really wanted to know what the mysterious person had experienced, and where he was currently. However, the Azure Yang Lord sensed that even though the enchantment was very powerful, it had existed for a long period of time. So it was a lot weaker than what it was in the past. The powerful energy in the enchantment had also been greatly weakened. This energy was very mysterious, but yet, he found it somewhat familiar. Subtly, the energy was calling out to him. This surprised the Azure Yang Lord greatly. Why would an enchantment in this tiny world have an energy that he was familiar with? However, no matter how hard he thought and tried to recall, he could not remember where this energy could have come from or where he had previously encountered it. Chapter 551, The Origins of the God Burial Abyss. The Azure Yang Lord could not help but want to crack the enchantment. He felt that something in the enchantment was extremely important to him. Besides, the existence of the enchantment was most likely connected to the entrance that linked this world to the sinkhole. If the Azure Yang Lord wanted to return to the Yang God Empyrean heaven, he naturally needed to figure the secret behind the sinkhole out. The enchantment had existed for too long, and its layout largely contained the pure Yang Great Tao. Since the Azure Yang Lord cultivated pure Yang laws himself, he found the coincidence very unusual. He drew inspiration from the Great Tao contained in the enchantment. From the eternal whirlpool, he gained insight in the laws within the enchantment. He matched it against the Yang God manual he cultivated, and he slowly understood several key points. As such, he stayed in the God Burial Abyss eternal whirlpool, and in a blink of an eye, 7 years had passed. During those 7 years, the ancient Great Empress accompanied the Azure Yang Lord as she helped him expound on the laws. She cultivated pure Yin laws, which were the completely opposite, and as such, she gave the Azure Yang Lord a lot of inspiration. Time passed, and after many years and many attempts by the Azure Yang Lord, he managed to crack the powerful ancient enchantment. During this period, with his attempts at cracking the enchantment, the Azure Yang Lord's cultivation level also increased. The hard work paid off eventually, as the Azure Yang Lord finally succeeded 7 years later. By joining forces with the ancient Great Empress, he managed to crack the ancient enchantment open. At the moment he cracked the enchantment open, the Azure Yang Lord felt a terrifying energy backlash. His body quaked as he vomited blood. In the enchantment, he did not encounter any opportunities that he was familiar with. All he saw was the phantom image of a gigantic eye. The eye's gaze was cold, as if it treated everything in the world with indifference. Both the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress were stunned. Just as they couldn't understand what was happening, a terrifying energy shot out of the gigantic eye, straight into the clouds. The energy penetrated the untraversable sea, and then the Tian Yuan world, and then it broke past the heavens. The world's sky began to crack and crumble. This was what it really meant by heaven crumbling and earth shattering. The Azure Yang Lord witnessed gigantic cracks appearing in the blue sky with his own eyes, then large tracts of pieces of sky fell. These pieces of sky fell onto the land, smashing mountains and truncating rivers. It destroyed several ancient martial inheritances. Be it mortals or warriors, in front of this apocalyptic energy, they appeared minute. Their lives were like tiny water drops in a turbulent storm. They were all destroyed. Instantly, the entire Tian Yuan world was filled with large amounts of death and injury. The Azure Yang Lord was startled. He knew that the pieces of sky that fell from the sky was not the sky. The sky was endless without a boundary after all. It was not like a ball that surrounded the Tian Yuan world. The shattered pieces of sky were actually another enchantment. It was a larger enchantment that enveloped the entire Tian Yuan world. This huge enchantment had sealed the world in which the Tian Yuan world resided in. And it was this enchantment that prevented the Azure Yang Lord from finding the passage back to the 12 Empyrean heavens. Logically speaking, with the Azure Yang Lord's cultivation level, he could completely travel the cosmos with his body, moving through numerous worlds. The Azure Yang Lord could not figure out who had the ability to seal a world with an enchantment that lasted for such a long period of time. The amount of effort required was immense. And why did he do all of this? The enchantment was destroyed, and the balance of nature in the world had toppled. The residents of the Tian Yuan world were either dead or injured. It looked like a scene from Armageddon. The Azure Yang Lord witnessed everything. He felt his mind tremble as he turned breathless. He sensed that his action of cracking the ancient enchantment open had resulted in all that had happened. What he found in the God Burial Abyss was not an ancient opportunity, it was a box that sealed an evil demon. The existence of the God Burial Abyss was actually due to an ancient mighty figure, who sealed an evil demon in the world where the Tian Yuan world resided. This world was just a vessel. The God Burial Abyss was the place where the seal resided. And he used 14 years to open the box himself, releasing the evil demon that was hidden inside. The calamity had lasted for a full month before it gradually stopped. The Azure Yang Lord was speechless for a long period of time after seeing the world that had been mostly destroyed. He had only wanted to return to the 12 Empyrean heavens, but he had caused such a tragedy. He finally understood why he felt a calling from the enchantment. He sensed a familiar energy which was actually a lure by the evil demon. He had unknowingly fallen into a trap. With the world seal removed, the Azure Yang Lord could feel the Yuan Qi that came from beyond this world. He could even feel that he could use his own strength to travel the cosmos and find a path in the vast universe back to the 12 Empyrean heavens. But he probably could not go back. With the enchantment removed, this world is already linked to the outside world. I should be happy, but now I have made a grave mistake. Facing the ancient great empress, the Azure Yang Lord lamented. If he left, this world would crumble. Furthermore, the ancient existence that was sealed in the God Burial Abyss had unfathomable strength. If it fully appeared again, it could even cause a tragedy to the 12 Empyrean heavens. The Azure Yang Lord believed that even at his peak, he was definitely no match for this ancient existence. He used 14 years to help the gigantic eye break through the core of the array. The one who really broke this world's seal was the eye itself. The ancient great empress did not say a word as she stood quietly behind the Azure Yang Lord. No matter what the Azure Yang Lord's decision was, she would support it. Before this, the Azure Yang Lord wanted to return to the 12 Empyrean heavens to question Buyuan, and the ancient great empress had silently helped him find the path back to the 12 Empyrean heavens. Now, the Azure Yang Lord wanted to correct his wrong. The ancient great empress would also stand by his side to battle on, regardless of the cost. After the gigantic eye completely destroyed the seal that enveloped this world, it entered a quiet state. It seemed like all the energy it had gathered had been consumed with that one attack. The Azure Yang Lord sensed that although the world seal had been destroyed, the gigantic eye still had not completely escaped the restraints of the God Burial Abyss eternal whirlpool. The God Burial Abyss itself was also a seal. Back when the Azure Yang Lord first arrived in this world and saw the God Burial Abyss, he saw a black beam shooting out of the God Burial Abyss like a pillar that supported the heavens. It shot straight at the Tian Yuan world, like it was supporting the entire Tian Yuan world. Back then, the Azure Yang Lord thought that the beam supported the suspended continent of the Tian Yuan world, but now, he realized that it was completely not the case. The Tian Yuan world was actually suspended above the eternal whirlpool. When the Azure Yang Lord realized this, he flew up into the sky and enveloped the entire Tian Yuan world with his perception. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the vast, floating continent above the eternal whirlpool and the untraversable sea was actually in the shape of a regular square. such a regularized shape was thick and even. Furthermore, deep in the continent, there was a faint Tao charm circulating it. This was definitely no original piece of land. The Azure Yang Lord suddenly realized the Tian Yuan world continent was itself a magical item. It could be a squarish disc array, or a chessboard. And the role of this gigantic magical item was to suppress the God Burial Abyss. Upon realizing this, the Azure Yang Lord was shocked. What was buried under the God Burial Abyss? To ensure that the existence was sealed, the mighty ancient person who created the seal did not only limit it to sealing this world. The person had even set up the God Burial Abyss ancient array, and used such a gigantic magical item to completely suppress the ancient array. Such a method was probably something that no one could compare with even when placed in the 12 empyrean heavens. And it was because of the layers of seals that it managed to restrain the terrifying eye, preventing it from escaping even after the enchantment had been destroyed. But it was just a matter of time. The Azure Yang Lord felt that he could not wait any longer. He had already caused great loss to the Tian Yuan world, with countless creatures dying. He needed to do something so as to right his wrong, before the gigantic eye was fully freed. However, just as the Azure Yang Lord was thinking of finding a way to seal the ancient evil demon, 7 mysterious people appeared in front of the Azure Yang Lord. The 7 people were dressed in large black cloaks. Below the cloaks were black armor engraved with mysterious patterns. Their bodies emitted ancient horrific auras. Translator's notes: this reveal has been a plot point that has existed ever since the Tian Yuan world and the God Burial Abyss was first introduced. The author had let on months ago to me when I asked him what was up with the God Burial Abyss, and he said it was a seal, and the entire Tian Yuan world was being used to suppress it. From experience, there will be many questions such as what the eye is and exactly who sealed it. And to these questions, it will take time for their answers to be revealed. So hang in there. Also, this chapter answers the question why the present heritage was so much weaker than ancient times, as asked by Panther Lady back in chapter 464. Due to this apocalyptic event, many inheritances were lost, causing martial arts to start from scratch. As such, this was a place where martial arts was still growing in its infancy, as mentioned in the synopsis of True Martial World. Chapter 552, The 7 Demon Disciples. The faces of the 7 cloaked figures were hidden. Only indistinct pairs of glowing red eyes could be vaguely seen. Their gazes were cold and indifferent as they stood there like statues. Just from the aura alone, the Azure Yang Lord knew that these 7 were not from this world. He was certain that they had come out of the ancient enchantment. Although the ancient eye had cracked the enchantment, it seemed to end up consuming too much energy, resulting in it entering a deep sleep. On the other hand, these 7 people were not human. They were the evil demon's guardians, and were named Demon Disciples. The reason why the 7 demon disciples came to the Azure Yang Lord was to make him one of them, to make him the 8th fiend disciple, a fiend disciple of the human race. They promised a lot, but all of these promises sounded extremely harsh in the Azure Yang Lord's ears. The Azure Yang Lord was already suffering from having greatly sinned by causing the huge destruction onto the Tian Yuan world. So the moment the 7 demon disciples opened their mouths, a murderous intent emitted from the Azure Yang Lord's gaze. Since they were messengers of the ancient existence, they deserved to die. There was no need to speak, all that mattered was to battle. The Azure Yang Lord was always true to himself, and the ancient great empress, who was always silent, had already silently conjured an ice lotus beneath her feet. The Azure Yang Lord's sword was unsheathed. The ancient great empress's figure was like a snow fairy as she floated forward. The two worked together in the battle, fighting 2 against 7. However, the 7 black-armored warriors were extremely powerful. Every attack they made contained nomological charms that were completely different from this world. With the 7 of them fighting alongside each other, the battle with the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress was really world-changing. Even the people in the Tian Yuan world, who were ignorant of the ongoings, looked at the sky in shock and fear. The entire sky was filled with black clouds and bolts of lightning. There was also a thick blood-red color amidst it. It felt like the sky would shed blood at any moment. The Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress was at a disadvantage against the black-armored warriors. However, with the two of them cooperating, neither side could overpower the other. Eventually, several of the 7 black-armored warriors were injured, while the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress were seriously injured. Without being able to carry on the battle, they could only retreat. After the Azure Yang Lord retreated, the 7 demon disciples did not return to the eternal whirlpool. They instead began killing several martial family clans and sects in the Tian Yuan world. They made people submit to them. As for those who did not, they were killed on the spot. They threw the murdered warriors into the eternal whirlpool as a sacrifice and food for the evil demon. It seemed like it was a form of sacrificial offering that would make the ancient existence inside the whirlpool recover faster. In time, the Tian Yuan world was overwhelmed by murder. People had to fend for themselves. The lands disintegrated, but there were courageous and righteous warriors who would rather die than submit. However, not everyone were like that. Against such a terrifying existence, some people began to suspect that the world was changing. The existence sealed within the eternal whirlpool was about to reign supreme. Their era was about to be overturned and buried. With the apocalypse coming, the ugliness of human nature was revealed. Some people, in order to become stronger, to survive, or to seek revenge against those who towered above them, were willing to become traitors. In this way, the 7 demon disciples began to expand and develop their own faction. As for the Azure Yang Lord, at this moment, he discovered the Desolate Race. The Desolate Race and the human race had always drawn a clear line between themselves. They did not interact with each other. To the human race, the Desolate Race's existence was not only ancient and mysterious, they were also extremely dangerous. By the time the Azure Yang Lord discovered the Desolate Race, the situation had already deteriorated to the point where nearly all martial arts of the Tian Yuan world had been destroyed. On the other hand, the Desolate Race's strength was still preserved almost perfectly. The Azure Yang Lord gained the approval of the Desolate Race's Desolate King back then, allowing for him to become their leader. With the enchantment cracked, the demon disciples went rampant. The world was on the brink of destruction. It was not only a tragedy for the human race, but for the entire world. The Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress led the Desolate Race as they launched a counterattack against the demon disciples and their faction. Every battle caused blood to flow like rivers. It resulted in countless numbers of death and injuries. And during this process, the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress cultivated the Great Empress Heart Sutra together. Every duo cultivation they partake in allowed for them to break through time and again. Their minds became one as their strength increased. As for the 7 demon disciples, they were ultimately no match for the combined forces of the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress. After a bitter final battle, the faction established by the demon disciples was uprooted. The 7 demon disciples were also killed one by one, after the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress paid a heavy price. After this huge battle, be it the Tian Yuan world or the Divine Wilderness's Desolate Race, they were all in a disastrous state. People were plunged into an abyss of misery. It was unknown how many martial arts inheritances, which had been passed down for ages, were severed. Many large family clans who had hundreds of thousands of years of inheritance had been completely destroyed and left with no descendants. Seeing the miserable outcome of the war, the Azure Yang Lord sighed. His life was full of ups and downs. In the Yang God Emperor in heaven, he was previously high-spirited and was the ruler of a country. He then became a great world's divine lord, receiving the admiration of the people. Then, he was betrayed by his wife in his cultivation chamber. At Wanshur Mountain, he suffered a devastating defeat while battling against Xia Hongxue. After losing everything, his friends from the past began to drift away from him. He traveled alone and entered the sinkhole, eventually losing his way back. After coming to this world, he fell for the scheme in the whirlpool, making a grave mistake that was nearly impossible to redeem. His life could only be described as extremely bleak. However, amidst this continuous sequences of failure and misery, he met her. She was a girl with naturally terminated meridians, but she had never abandoned the opportunity to reverse her own fate. Whether he was down or had suffered failure, no matter if he had made a grave mistake causing the deaths of billions, or him unsheathing his sword to engage in a bloody battle with the 7 demon disciples, she always silently followed behind him, never abandoning him. If he wanted to roam the world, she would accompany him to travel the world. If he wanted to engage in a bloody war, she would accompany him in battle. Through it all, she had never complained once. She was like a star in his bleak life that illuminated everything. The Azure Yang Lord realized that it did not really matter whether he returned to the 12 Empyrean heavens. What was most important was to cherish the person before him. So what if he washed away the disgrace of his defeat back in the Central State Divine Territory? So what if he unwinded the obsession and indignance he experienced from Bai Yuan's betrayal? With a woman accompanying him to the ends of time, what else was there to wish for? However, by the time he understood all this, it was already too late. The Tian Yuan world's calm was just on the surface. The 7 demon disciples had just been suppressed. They appeared to be undying and indestructible. They would eventually awaken again in the future. Furthermore, the terrible evil demon in the eternal whirlpool was just temporarily asleep. Since the enchantment had been cracked, once it woke up, the Tian Yuan world would experience a real apocalyptic catastrophe. The Azure Yang Lord knew that he was running out of time. The enlightenment he received in his heart was already sensed by the ancient Great Empress who was silently accompanying him. The two of them began the final preparations. Together, they established the Great Empress Mystic Realm. They left their inheritance in it, hoping that a successor would inherit their unfinished mission in the future. In the Great Empress Mystic Realm, the Azure Yang Lord moved the grass hut, where he first met the ancient Great Empress, in its entirety. In the grass hut, one of them brandished a sword while enjoying alcohol, while the other played the zither and sang. They were like an immortal couple. The Azure Yang Lord's uninhibited life was filled with ups and downs. Having felt both extreme happiness and sadness, he knew how difficult it was to earn happiness. If he could make this moment last forever, that would be a blissful matter. However, be it the Azure Yang Lord or the ancient Great Empress, they knew that these days were not going to last. They had a tacit understanding, as they experienced the last moment of warmth together, cherishing their every breath. However, they eventually had to bring an end to all of this. After leaving the grass hut, the Azure Yang Lord left behind a paragraph of text, solely wishing that he and the Great Empress would be able to lead ordinary lives, sticking with each other until their hair turned gray. Only if all of this ended. After that, the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress entered the eternal whirlpool hand in hand, so as to mend the already broken seal. The memory ended there, for none of them ever returned. Lin Xintong had already awoken at this moment. She did not know what had happened after that. She had no idea if the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress had been killed by the existence within the eternal whirlpool or if they had used their lives to form an enchantment in order to seal the evil demon. Thinking back to the ancient Great Empress and the Azure Yang Lord's lives, the great sorrow and joy filled them with emotions. And now, she and Yi Yun had inherited their inheritance, and also their legacy. Chapter 553, The Sixth Level. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong stood before the two portraits, silent and in deep thought. Just now, while they were each within their own lengthy dream, they had each experienced the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress lives. They had used the ancient couple's eyes to see this world, and to understand the Yin-Yang laws. This was a rare opportunity for both Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. Both of them looked each other in the eye. They felt they had deepened their understanding of the Great Empress Heart Sutra, and if they were to begin cultivating now, it would not take long for them to succeed in cultivating the Jade Marrow spiritual energy and the Nine Yang spiritual energy. Who would have thought that the Tian Yuan world had such a secret? The world we are in is just a sealed vessel, and the eternal whirlpool in the God burial abyss is the core of the seal. The Tian Yuan world is just a huge magical item, so as to suppress and seal. Yi Yun still remembered the first time he arrived in the Tian Yuan world. It was floating above the untraversable sea, and it had smooth edges that were steep cliffs. From afar, they looked like infinite divine walls that lay across the horizon. Back then, Yi Yun was struck by the magnificent appearance of the Tian Yuan world, only now did he realize that it was a magical item. The ancient evil demon within the God burial abyss is too terrifying. Just to seal it again, even the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress never returned after they left. They eventually failed to complete the seal, and now, this mission has landed on our shoulders, Lin Xintong sighed. There was some hesitation in her eyes, but she was also a lot more determined. In the Great Empress mystic realm, she had found the way to join up her naturally terminated meridians. The ancient Great Empress was like a master to her. Naturally, she could not let down the important task entrusted by the ancient Great Empress. Besides, the Lin family was in the Tian Yuan world, be it Su Jie or Matriarch Lin, they were the dearest people to Lin Xintong, other than Yi Yun. She could not sit idly by while the Tian Yuan world was destroyed. Lin Xintong turned towards Yi Yun. She noticed he was silent and had his eyes closed, as if he was digesting all that he had seen. After a long time, he whispered, "Xintong, let us go to that place. I believe we can now enter it." As Yi Yun spoke, he walked out the hall which was at the third level of the God Advent Tower. Lin Xintong silently followed him. She followed in the footsteps of the ancient Great Empress who followed the Azure Yang Lord so many years ago. The two of them moved up the staircase. They walked slowly, step by step. They passed by door after door of light. It took them a full hour before they arrived before the sixth level of the God Advent Tower. This was the top level of the God Advent Tower. Back when they came here the first time, the door was tightly shut and stood motionless. After cultivating for 5 years and experiencing the ancient Great Empress and Azure Yang Lord's lives, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong once again stood before the door, but their mentalities were completely different from before. They looked each other in the eye as they placed their palms on the door. Bam! Both their Yuan Qi exploded. The complex ancient patterns on the heavy door began to light up one by one. Pure yin and yang laws surged between their bodies. The glow emitted by the ancient door began to grow in intensity as it illuminated the entire God Advent Tower. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong circulated their energies to a maximum, as their yin and yang energies interwove in the void, forming a great Tao picture. The ancient door seemed to melt as it echoed a caw-caw sound. Finally, the two sides of the heavy door slowly opened up from the middle. Ever since entering the Great Empress mystic realm, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had spent 6 years in it. After 6 years, they managed to step into the last level of the God Advent Tower. Finally, on this day, the God Advent Tower had opened up to them completely. Boom! The door fully opened, and as if a piece of dusty history was pushed apart, a primordial aura surged out before they could even enter. It seemed like there was a pair of eyes in the space behind the door, which traversed across the sea of time and was watching them from a distance. It seemed like a whisper was coming from behind the door. It was unknown whose voice it belonged to. The flittering sound was like if it was calling out to someone, or telling a story no one knew. This special feeling made Yi Yun and Lin Xintong hold their breaths. Yi Yun sensed that something in it was resonating within him. He took a deep breath and, while holding Lin Xintong's hand, slowly walked through the door. Inside, it was surprisingly quiet. They were the first to step into this space that had been sealed for so many years. It was just a quiet room. In front of them there was a wooden table, placed above some bamboo mats. The wooden table was smooth and remained dustless. The table's wooden texture was apparent to the eyes, and there was a cyan light coming from a lamp flickering above it. The tiny bit of light was like starlight in the dark night. It was unknown for how many years the lamp had been lit. It was as if the owner of this room had never left. After looking at the wooden table, Yi Yun could not help but walk up to it. Back then, it was most probably that the Azure Yang Lord sat on the bamboo mat. Yi Yun sat down, and in a trance, the voice he previously heard as a whisper echoed in his ears once again. It was as if an invisible figure was sitting there, just like him, reciting a poem. This was not Yi Yun's hallucination, but an actual voice. The Azure Yang Lord was gone, but his aura from back then and his voice still remained undissipated. Even though it had been so long, it still could manifest in this chamber. This proved how deep and profound the Azure Yang Lord's understanding of the laws was. And such a person was helpless against the terrifying existence beneath the eternal whirlpool. Yi Yun looked at the wooden table while deep in thought. A black disc, which was not very eye-catching, was placed on it. Other than that, there was a cotton bag nonchalantly left beside it as well. Yi Yun picked up the black disc and instantly, an intense resonance happened. Yi Yun's yuan qi was hauled by it as it erupted. The circular disc lit up and projected an image. The image was a mini tower. "It is the God Advent Tower," Lin Xintong exclaimed. Yi Yun was also surprised. This circular disc had projected the God Advent Tower, and by carefully sensing it, he was even more surprised. The circular disc was the core disc array of the God Advent Tower. With the Azure Yang token in hand, Yi Yun sank his perception into the disc array. Suddenly, he felt his perception spread across to every corner of the God Advent Tower. Everything within the God Advent Tower was now at his fingertips. This feeling was extremely wonderful. This is where the core of the God Advent Tower is? Lin Xintong clearly guessed it as she asked. Yi Yun nodded, and a hint of excitement could be seen in his eyes. Previously, the inheritance he obtained only controlled a tiny portion of the God Advent Tower, but with this disc array, he would be able to completely control the entire God Advent Tower. As long as he refined this disc array, he would become the true master of the God Advent Tower. The God Advent Tower was not just a place of trials, it was also an immortal cave, as well as a magical item. When Yi Yun was sufficiently strong, he and Lin Xintong could power the God Advent Tower, sealing the sun and moon, suppressing the mountains and rivers. Then, no matter what enemies they encountered, they would be able to completely seal and suppress them. Chapter 554, Draco First True Gold. On the wooden table, beside the God Advent Tower's disc array, there was a cotton bag that was left behind by the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress. And beside the cotton bag, there was a carved lacquer wooden box. Yi Yun could faintly sense that the items in the wooden box and cotton bag were extremely extraordinary. Previously, people had guessed that there was a Great Empress vault in the mystic realm. And if he was not wrong, this was probably the vault. However, the vault was too different from what people guessed. The treasures in the vault only numbered a few, but each treasure was extremely precious. Yi Yun opened the wooden box. After millions of years, the first opening of the box emitted a faint ice-blue runic pattern. As an icy mist rose, it hazed up the void. Yi Yun focused his eyes and he saw that in the wooden box, there was a hairpin. The hairpin looked like it was carved out of crystal. On one end of the hairpin, there was a lifelike blue jay carving that looked extremely intricately carved. And the other end was covered with profound-looking runic lines. This hairpin was apparently a treasure. Yi Yun looked at the hairpin and he felt that the gaze that he sensed while standing outside the door came from this hairpin. The hairpin, when in hand, somehow made him feel like he was being watched. Yi Yun sank his perception deep into the hairpin and he realized that it contained the aura of the ancient Great Empress. The Purian laws that the ancient Great Empress cultivated were after all not the same as what Yi Yun cultivated, so he found it difficult to thoroughly understand the profoundness in it. This hairpin is a treasure left behind by the ancient Great Empress. Xintong, you can refine it. Yi Yun handed the hairpin over to Lin Xintong, to which she nodded and took the hairpin. The hairpin's aura was something Lin Xintong could not understand either. She could vaguely sense that the ancient Great Empress had left behind a lot of Dao charm and insights within the hairpin. This made the hairpin have some spiritual quality to it, resulting in people feeling like they were being watched. Ignoring that the hairpin could be used as a Dao item itself, just wearing it alone would allow one to gain insight into the charms within. It was a very big opportunity for Lin Xintong. After the hairpin, Yi Yun turned his attention to the small cotton bag. The cotton bag was about the size of a palm and it was light in his hand. When Yi Yun sank his perception in, he realized that the cotton bag contained a vast independent space within it. It was a cosmos bag. The cosmos bag was similar to interspatial rings, and it was used to store treasured items. However, several interspatial rings had a limited lifespan. According to the quality of the ring, after tens of thousands of years, the space within the interspatial ring would destabilize, and it would eventually crumble completely. However, the cosmos bag in Yi Yun's hand would not. Even after billions of years, it would also not be destroyed. Since the cosmos bag was now ownerless, when Yi Yun sank his perception in, he could easily open it. The space within the cosmos bag was very large. It was thousands of times bigger than the interspatial rings Yi Yun possessed. However, it was largely empty except for one item. The item was about 7 feet tall. It stood vertically and it looked like a stone statue used for carving. The surface of the stone statue was covered with beautiful runic patterns that resembled flames. At this moment, Yi Yun's understanding of the pure yang laws was extremely deep. He just needed one look to realize that these flame-like runic patterns were because this piece of stone had been placed in a pure yang land. After millions of years, the pure yang great Tao had naturally formed runic patterns on it. Yi Yun had some thoughts as he gently touched the stone with his hand. The stone was heavy and hard, but the instant Yi Yun's fingers touched it, several cracks appeared on its surface. Pa! 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 A barrage of soft cracking sounds echoed as the number of cracks increased and turned clearer. They looked like spider webs. Oh! Lin Xintong was alarmed. The strange stone was naturally a precious treasure to be placed here, but why did it crack the moment Yi Yun touched it? No worries. Yi Yun waved his hand as he stared intently at the strange stone. His understanding of the pure yang laws were naturally deeper than Lin Xintong's. Since it was a divine item that was the outcome of being born in a supreme yang land, he knew what was going on. The number of cracks increased and they became bigger. After a few seconds, golden light shot out from the cracks. These beams formed a rainbow in the sky and it was absolutely gorgeous. Pa! 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 Accompanying the golden light, the external layers of the cracked stone began to peel off. The moment the external layers landed on the ground, they became white dust and scattered across the ground. Lin Xintong could not help but squint as the beams were too intense. Finally, all the external layers of the stone had fallen, and an odd item landed on the ground. The odd item was about 3 feet long. It was completely smooth and it looked like a fetus curled in its mother's womb. It was dark gold, it looked extremely heavy, and it had a metallic texture, so how did it look anything like a fetus? What is it? Lin Xintong could not help but ask. A divine item nurtured from an extreme yang land. Yi Yun gently touched the dark gold item as he carefully sensed the Tao patterns within it. In this world, examples of extreme yang lands were the deepest depths of pure yang lava, or in the cores of special stars. The pure yang energy in these areas were strong beyond imagination. Even a mighty master skilled in pure yang laws might burn to ashes if they entered such a place. However, there were divine items that could absorb the essence of its surroundings and gradually form itself. After millions of years of pure yang energy's refinement, these precious treasures reached an unfathomable level of quality and value. If I'm not wrong, this is Draco First True Gold. Yi Yun explained, for he knew more about pure yang Tao than Lin Xintong. Draco First True Gold. Lin Xintong was stunned. As she looked at the precious item again, a glimmer appeared in her eyes. A divine item of this grade was equivalent to a legend. A strange stone that absorbed the essence of the world as it refined itself in an extreme Yang land would form a natural Dao rune that resembled the most primal nomological form. The strange stone then refines itself into true gold. This was the so-called golden touch. The Draco First True Gold was the extreme point of having experienced the golden touch. This sort of material is a real gem. If it is used to cast into a weapon, it would create a divine artifact. Unfortunately, it's too difficult to refine it. Lin Xintong shook her head gently. Whether it was her or Yun, it was not possible for them to refine the Draco First True Gold. How could a natural divine item that was formed after being refined in pure Yang divine infernos in an extreme Yang land be refined by the two of them? This sort of item is very valuable, but we can't use it for the time being. As Lin Xintong said that, Yun stood in front of the Draco First True Gold in deep thought. He gently touched the Dao runes on the surface of the Draco First True Gold. After a long while, a strange glimmer appeared in his eyes. He said happily, "There's no need to refine it. I know how to use it. It is already a divine item that has been tempered by extreme Yang infernos. Its value is unimaginable." Chapter 555, Refining the True Gold. Hearing what Yun said, Lin Xintong looked at him in surprise. She did not understand such a divine item. "Xintong, if I am not wrong, this Draco First True Gold was obtained by the Azure Yang Lord within the sinkhole." He knew what it was, but did not hastily refine it into a weapon. Instead, he placed it on the top level of the God Advent Tower, and used the God Advent Tower's large array foundation to slowly nourish it. This is because the Azure Yang Lord had already realized what was so special about the Draco First True Gold. As Yun spoke, he touched the Dao runes on the Draco First True Gold, so as to confirm his hypothesis. He carried on saying, "The Draco First True Gold is a result of precious stone. It had experienced millions of years under pure Yang heavenly Dao, eventually turning from stone into gold. The Draco First True Gold is also the extreme point of having experienced the golden touch. When the Draco First True Gold carries on existing in an extreme Yang land, it will absorb pure Yang, evolve and be able to sense the heaven and earth. Gradually, the true gold will give birth to flesh and blood. When that happens, the Draco First True Gold itself might possess life. In the future, once the Draco First True Gold comes to life, its body will possess a Dao body divine fetus, which would be a peerless person of excellence." Lin Xintong was stunned hearing what Yun said. "You mean, the Draco First True Gold before us has already produced a body of flesh and blood?" "It is likely that it has happened from my sensing," Yun said in a certain manner. In the middle of a precious stone was the Draco First True Gold. In the true gold was a body of flesh and blood. This was equivalent to a divine body, formed naturally from the laws of heaven and earth. It showcased the miraculous power of creation. If there really is a body of flesh and blood within the true gold, then refining it into a weapon would be too wasteful. Lin Xintong shook her head. She knew that from Yun's confidence, he had already found a way to use this precious stone. Yun said, "Of course, if my guesses are correct, when the Azure Yang Lord obtained the Draco First True Gold, it had already given birth to a body of flesh and blood, but it was still not mature, so it was unable to achieve the Azure Yang Lord's goals. The Azure Yang Lord left it here in the top level of the God Advent Tower, to let it be nourished by the large arrays for millions of years. While pure Yang energy was provided to it, some extreme Yin energy was also injected into it, causing Yin Yang to complement each other, resulting in a peerless Dao fetus. With at least millions of years of nourishment, this Dao fetus has already taken form, and before it was conceived, the Azure Yang Lord left behind a spiritual imprint in the Dao fetus. With this spiritual imprint, once the Dao fetus takes form, it will become an excellent avatar." Yun was this sure because he had already sensed the Azure Yang Lord's spiritual imprint within the Draco First True Gold Dao fetus. If not for the spiritual imprint, the Draco First True Gold Dao fetus would take much longer than a few million years to form its own intelligence. And once the spiritual imprint was planted, this Dao fetus would be of one mind with the Azure Yang Lord. And the Dao fetus' own intelligence would not be formed. However, with the Azure Yang Lord disappearing into the eternal whirlpool, together with millions of years having passed, the Azure Yang Lord's spiritual imprint inside in the Tao fetus had already completely withered. A thread of consciousness could not exist without the fires of life supporting it, especially after leaving its main body for so long. Yun, according to what you said, if you plant your consciousness into the Tao fetus, wouldn't the Draco First True Gold become an avatar of yours? Lin Xintong had realized what Yun was hinting at. Once Yun had the Tao fetus as an avatar, it would be extremely beneficial for Yun. Disregarding the insights gained from understanding the laws, just the Tao fetus strength alone would be extremely powerful. Yun nodded. Yes, this Tao fetus is a grand legacy left behind by the Azure Yang Lord for people of the future. When the Azure Yang Lord headed into the eternal whirlpool in the God Burial Abyss to seal the ancient existence, the Draco First True Gold had not taken form. It was just too slow for such a mysterious treasure to take form. It could neither be sped up, even in a time enchantment. As time enchantment isolated themselves from the normal arrow of time, they would also isolate the Draco First True Gold's ability to sense the heaven and earth heavenly Tao. The Azure Yang Lord could not wait for the millions of years to pass, hence, he simply left the Draco First True Gold here, giving people of the future an opportunity. Now, after millions of years later, the embodiment had taken form by the time Yun and Lin Xintong arrived here. The Draco First True Gold was an extreme yang object and could only be refined by Yun. If Lin Xintong used her purine energy to control this embodiment, she would likely injure herself. Yun placed his hand on what looked like the forehead of the Tao fetus, as he branched out a bit of his consciousness, injecting it into the Draco First True Gold. Deep inside the True Gold, a fetus meridians, organs and blood vessels had already formed. Yun's consciousness followed the meridians and planted itself in the Draco First True Gold Tao fetus soul sea. With Yun's consciousness entering it, the withered consciousness left behind by the Azure Yang Lord had completed its mission. It began to turn to ash like an already decaying piece of dead wood. Sensing the Azure Yang Lord's consciousness dissipating, Yun was filled with emotions. A peerless figure of an era was turning to ashes in such a way. It was unknown how many excellent people had been buried in this magnificent great world. Yun faced the Tao fetus and gave it a deep bow. This bow was to respect the Azure Yang Lord's magnificent martial arts and his character, as well as the kindness for leaving an inheritance for people of the future. Yun's consciousness embedded itself deep inside the Tao fetus soul sea, as they slowly integrated as one. With the split consciousness having a new body, it could sense the world through this body. This feeling was rather magical. At this moment, the Draco First True Gold Tao fetus began to emit a dazzling divine light that was made up of gorgeous colors. The Draco First True Gold slowly melted. True gold that was born from an extreme yang land melted by itself, even though a martial arts master would find it difficult to refine. The melted true gold slowly condensed into lumps of dark golden armor. A youth that looked very similar to Yun appeared out of the golden light. This youth was only similar to Yun because he wasn't completely in human form. Many parts of his body were not made of flesh and blood, but instead made of dark Draco First True Gold. After all, for the initial incarnation of an avatar, this body had not completely evolved. Yun used his thoughts to control this external body. Bit by bit, he repaired the body, turning the Draco First True Gold into flesh and blood. This repair was actually just on the surface. The Draco First True Gold had not fully developed a body of flesh and blood, at least half of it was still true gold. Over time, once all of the Draco First True Gold was transformed, resulting in the avatar's complete form, then it itself would become an extreme Tao body. Yun could even use this extreme Tao body to gain insight into the laws, resulting in a multiplication effect. Fascinating. Yun's thoughts had already switched to his Draco First True Gold avatar. He slowly clenched his fists and used the vision of his avatar to look at his true body. Since his true body and avatar were mentally interlinked, it was equivalent to him having dual vision. Large amounts of pure yang energy surged into Yun's avatar, causing a huge vortex to appear in the lava pool. The terrifying power wantonly circulated as Yun's body was like a bottomless pit. Even the Red Lotus was being pulled along, causing it to stay away from Yun in fear. Originally, the Red Lotus was thankful to Yun, and often complimented Yun's cultivation. Whenever Yun required pure yang energy, the Red Lotus would take the initiative to provide him some. However, this time, it converged the energy within its body and hid away. The Red Lotus could not be blamed as the way Yun's avatar absorbed pure yang was too intense. Furthermore, with the Draco First True Gold being a heaven-grade treasure, it made the Red Lotus feel dread. The Draco First True Gold born out of an unknown extreme yang land had a quality that naturally far exceeded that of the Red Lotus. This was also a repression from their energy differences. The energy vortex lasted for 30 minutes as massive amounts of Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi surged into Yun's avatar. Even the cultivation chamber turned thin with pure yang energy due to Yun's feast. This depletion could be recovered in a few days, but to be able to do this greatly alarmed Lin Xintong. After all, previously, when she cultivated with Yun, no matter how much they tried, they were never able to reduce the cultivation chamber's energy at all. Finally, Yun sensed that his Draco First True Gold avatar's energy had reached its limits. Crackle! The Draco First True Gold avatar's joints issued an explosive sound like golden rocks clashing into each other. Boom! Lava burst out as Yun leaped out of the pure yang lava pool. Ha ha ha! With energy flowing through his own body, the feeling of being quenched made Yun laugh out loud. It felt too good. Such powerful pure yang energy gave Yun a feeling like he was an erupting volcano. He could not help but want to engage in a huge battle to relieve himself in delight. What power! The defensive power is invincible. This avatar is too powerful. Yun looked at the Draco First True Gold avatar with an excited glow shimmering in his eyes. The Draco First True Gold avatar was absolutely extraordinary just on defense alone. Who could destroy a body made from Draco First True Gold? As for endurance, that was needless to say. It was a divine body Tao fetus. It could connect to heaven-earth energy, and store immense amounts of pure yang yuan qi in its body. It was a tireless fighting machine. However, in terms of offensive power, the avatar depended on Yun's actual cultivation level. After all, an attack depended on one's insight into the laws and understanding of the moves, as well as the progress in cultivation technique. This was something that could not be separated from Yun's true body. Yun, this avatar is truly a most valuable treasure. Lin Xintong was happy for Yun. Yun laughed, yes, back then the Azure Yan Lord left such a divine item for us. I will only have this Draco First True Gold avatar. As for other things, Xintong, you can have them. The treasures in the 6th level were mainly the Draco First True Gold avatar, the essence-filled jade hairpin that belonged to the Great Empress, as well as the disc array that controlled the God Advent Tower. Amongst the first two treasures, due to the limitations of Yin Yan laws, they had to be respectively divided amongst Yun and Lin Xintong. However, the last God Advent Tower's core disc array could be refined by either Yun or Lin Xintong. Lin Xintong shook her head and took out the God Advent Tower disc array from her interspatial ring. Yun, I think it is better if you refine it. The Azure Yang token has already been refined by you, it will complement this disc array. You have to completely refine both to be able to fully control the God Advent Tower. As Lin Xintong spoke, she handed the disc array into Yun's hands. Noticing that he was about to refuse it, Lin Xintong said again, Yun, do not argue with me on this. If not for you, be it at the relic trial from back then, or in the extreme frost icy plains later, I would probably have died a few times. I might even have fallen into Shen Tu Nanshan's hands with a fate even more miserable. And now, not only am I treating and healing my naturally terminated meridians, I have also obtained the Great Empress inheritance. My future martial path will be extremely broad. This was all thanks to you. Meeting you has been my good luck. If, in the future, you are able to become a mighty figure like the Azure Yang Lord, or even surpass him, then I will also be like the ancient great empress. No matter what your decisions, I will silently follow and support you. Lin Xintong's words came from her heart. She was always proud and cold, seldom revealing her emotions. However, now, with her suddenly saying such words, Yi Yun felt his heart turn warm. He quietly put away the God Advent Tower's core disc array and took Lin Xintong's hands, softly saying, "Xintong, meeting you has also been my good luck." Chapter 557, Star Transference Heaven-Changing Book. Yi Yun sat in the lava pool and Yuan Qi circulated through his body as he gathered it towards his palm where he was grabbing the God Advent Tower's core disc array. Yuan Qi was being continuously injected into the disc array. Instantly, the disc array emitted bright rainbow colors that looked extremely gorgeous. Lin Xintong silently waited by the side, watching everything. Under the holy light's illumination, it bathed the youth, making him look like a son of God. Lin Xintong was filled with mixed emotions seeing this scene. Who would have thought that the ordinary youth she had met back in the cloud wilderness would achieve so much? He had even given her life and such a massive opportunity. This was maybe arranged by the heavens that she and Yi Yun would inherit all the inheritances left behind by the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient great empress perfectly. By inheriting their inheritance, they had also inherited their unfulfilled wishes, but Lin Xintong believed that they would not relive the Azure Yang Lord and ancient great empress lives. The holy light lasted for a full 15 minutes. Yi Yun's forehead was filled with sweat as the veins on his neck began to slightly protrude. Refining the core disc array required tremendous amount of mental strength. Thankfully, Yi Yun's mental strength was much stronger than warriors on the same level as him. After consuming nearly 90% of his mental strength, he finally refined the core disc array. The disc array had already turned into a stream of light, disappearing into Yi Yun's dantian. With the core disc array in his body, Yi Yun could immediately sense every change in the God Advent Tower with a thought. It was as if the God Advent Tower had become a part of him. What a wondrous feeling! Yi Yun was pleasantly surprised. He knew that if he wished, he could even power the God Advent Tower to make it slowly fly up. The God Advent Tower was now truly his magical treasure. Yi Yun opened his eyes and he had complete control over the God Advent Tower. He also knew the situation regarding the God Advent Tower. The God Advent Tower itself was an immortal cave. It was a place where a mighty figure could live and cultivate. It could also be used as a spiritual boat, allowing him to travel long distances. It could even travel through the vastness of space, as well as tour through different worlds. Other than these 2 points, the God Advent Tower could be used as a magical weapon against enemies. It was most common for a tower-shaped weapon to kill an enemy through suppression. With a tower crashing down and sealing an enemy, it could suppress everything. If a figure at the level of the Azure Yang Lord used the God Advent Tower, he could seal thousands of peerless experts and suppress billions of mortals at once. And as long as he sucked an enemy into the God Advent Tower, there were hundreds of ways to deal with them. There were several large arrays in the God Advent Tower, for example, killing arrays, illusion arrays, trapping arrays, as well as time seals. They could be used to arbitrarily imprison, kill, and refine opponents. Previously, the God Advent Tower's item spirit had activated the time seal, turning the 2 Blood Moon members, who had infiltrated the God Advent Tower, into living zombies. If it was not for the item spirit having to deal with the Eye of Destruction in the God Burial Abyss, resulting in her entering her slumber, it would have been a breeze for her to power the God Advent Tower to kill the 2 Blood Moon members. However, the God Advent Tower was a treasure that far exceeded Yi Yun's strength. Although he had become the God Advent Tower's owner, he was unable to completely expound its power. To use the God Advent Tower as a weapon against enemies was too difficult. There were too many large arrays, so Yi Yun was limited in using them. And to use any one of them would result in extraordinary power being amplified. It was extremely consuming on Yi Yun's Yuan Qi. What Yi Yun could now do was fly the God Advent Tower, making it his mobile fortress. As for controlling the God Advent Tower to traverse the void and tour the different worlds, that was still impossible. Even so, the God Advent Tower was still a treasure that could greatly increase his strength. And with the passage of time, Yun's strength would gradually increase, and the functions of the God Advent Tower would become more obvious. Shinton, we have fully explored the Great Empress mystic realm, and we have also inherited all of the ancient Great Empress and Azure Yang Lord's inheritance. It is time for us to leave, Yun said to Lin Shinton after refining the God Advent Tower's core disk array. Yes, it's time to leave. It's already been 6 years. I wonder what the situation is like outside. Upon saying this, a slight worry could be seen in Lin Shinton's beautiful eyes. Over the years, Lin Shinton's heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. She was worried about the Lin family. Although Yun had put in place several arrangements, allowing the Lin family to retreat safely from the Great Empress Mystic Realm trials, cutting off relationships with them so as to draw a line and shut themselves off, Lin Shinton was still very worried about the Lin family. In addition, Lin Shinton was also worried about the ancient existence sealed in the God Burial Abyss. She was wondering if there had been any changes over the past few years. Years ago, the 7 demon disciples had formed a large faction by establishing an organization named Blood Moon. Although the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress had allied with the Desolate race to destroy the Blood Moon, Lin Shinton knew that Blood Moon had not completely been destroyed. They had only gone dormant. After millions of years, it was hard to imagine what the current situation of Blood Moon was. All these made Lin Shinton find it difficult to just remain in the God Advent Tower. Although they were prepared to exit, Yun and Lin Shinton still needed to make their final preparations. In the 3rd level of the God Advent Tower, there were several cultivation and mystic techniques. The rule back then was for every cultivator to choose 2 cultivation technique. Yun had chosen the Complete Totem Mystic Technique, 10,000 Beast Totem, as well as a movement technique manual, Golden Crow Sun Shift. The techniques stored in the 3rd level of the God Advent Tower were collected by the Azure Yang Lord and the ancient Great Empress. A large number of them came from the Yang God Emperor in heaven. Back then, the Azure Yang Lord had obtained numerous cultivation techniques, having killed his enemies in the Yang God Emperor in heaven as well as exploring mystic realms. These cultivation techniques could even be a core inheritance of large sects in the Yang God Emperor in heaven. There were even some that were ancient manuals that came from ancient mystic realms. Although their value were inferior to the Yang God Manual and the 9 Nether Sacred Manual, they were also things that would make many Yang God Emperor in heaven warriors go crazy over. Amongst the cultivation techniques, other than those of little value, the others all had their own effects. Back then, although the Azure Yang Lord focused on pure Yang laws, he had also chosen to cultivate a few of them to complement his own energies. Now, Yun and Lin Shinton were making the final preparations by choosing to cultivate a few of these cultivation techniques. Yun and Lin Shinton screened through the manuals for a long time before Yun removed a jade slip from a bookshelf solemnly. The jade slip's name was the Star Transference Heaven Changing Book. One could find it extremely domineering just from the name, as if it would pick the stars and change the sun. But in fact, this cultivation level was not used to increase one's combat ability, nor was it used to refine one's cultivation level or insight into laws. It was just a complementary mystic technique. There was only one role, which was to change one's appearance, as well as the soul's aura and mark of life. They could all be changed, preventing others from recognizing the person. It was a disguise technique. Even the trajectories of stars and the heavens could be changed. This proved how powerful this mystic technique was. Even someone a few realms higher than the person wearing the disguise would not be able to see through it. Yun and Lin Shinton could no longer appear in public. So before they went out, they first needed to create a secret identity. Cultivating this Star Transference Heaven Changing Book was a necessity. Chapter 558, Misty Face Sea. It was a summer morning. The vast sea surface was calm while a layer of mist shrouded above it. Occasionally, there would be a few school of large fish traversing across the surface of the sea at extremely fast speeds, causing wave breaks in the water surface. The untraversable sea was the sea surrounding the Tianyuan world, but in fact, when warriors mentioned the untraversable sea, they were mostly referring to the vast sea region to the north and west of the Tianyuan continent. The deeper one went into that region of sea, the thinner the heaven-earth Yuan Qi would become. Even marine life became extremely rare the further one went. Even warriors at the Imperial King realm would not receive the supplement of heaven-earth Yuan Qi when they flew through this region, so naturally they did not dare to venture too deep. This was the true meaning of untraversable. As for the waters near the Tianyuan world, although they were conjoined with the untraversable sea, they were in fact given different names by warriors, for example, the Misty Fei Sea. The Misty Fei Sea was to the south of the Tianyuan world and covered hundreds of thousands of miles. The sea was perennially covered in a layer of mist, and all one could see from afar was the mist. The Misty Fei Sea was extremely dangerous as terrifying sea fei inhabited these waters. The mist and the fei were what gave the sea its name. Actually, these sea fei were basically forms of terrifying desolate beasts. They could easily crush a spirit boat and devour the warriors in it. As a result, the several small sects, which took up residence near the Misty Fei Sea, feared this aquatic region. However, even if they were afraid, they still needed to go out to sea. At this moment, above a small island in the Misty Fei Sea, there were more than 10 yellow-dressed warriors. They were all about 17 years of age. A white cloud was embroidered onto the collar of their clothes. This was the symbol of the White Soaring Sect's core disciples. To become a core disciple proved that these youths were pretty talented. Amongst the youths was a purple-clothed man who was in his 40s or 50s. His collar was embroidered with 3 white clouds. He was the team leader of these young disciples. The youths hid behind the island's reefs as they stared unblinkingly at the foggy sea. "Master Uncle Zhou, we have been in ambush for an entire night. Is the fei-luring pill we prepared not good enough to attract the sea beasts?" A 16-year-old, big-eyed girl with an oval face asked the purple-dressed team leader. The purple-dressed man shook his head, saying, "Do not be hasty. Our fei-luring pill may not be of good quality, but that is not because our sect cannot produce a high-quality fei-luring pill. It is for safety reasons. We came into the deep seas for a training experience, so it is extremely dangerous. If the quality of the fei-luring pill is too high, it might attract a sea beast that we may be unable to handle. That would be big trouble. No, this fei-luring pill is enough to attract some desolate beasts, like the bloodthirsty sharks or the heaven-runic sea serpents. As long as they fall into the trap, you can join forces to deal with them. It will give you rewards as well as increase your battle experience. I will watch by the side, so that there will not be any accidents. If we accidentally lure some deep-sea behemoth, even I will be helpless." The purple-dressed man shook his head with a wry smile. This region of sea was not safe. However, no matter where it was, the cultivation of warriors could never deviate from killing desolate beasts. Be it refining desolate bones into relics, or killing desolate beasts to condense an aspect totem, they had to do so. The sects in the Tianyuan world all relied on their surroundings. Those sects in landlocked areas would naturally go deep into the vast expanse of mountains, marshes or jungles in the Tianyuan world for exploration. As for those small sects that lined up along the shore, they could only take the risk to fight at sea. White Soaring Sect was such a small sect. Although they were a small sect, that was just a relative term. If they were to be placed where the Tai Divine Kingdom was, they would be considered a top faction. The group of people patiently waited at the island until it was close to noon. Yet, not a single desolate beast had come. The purple-dressed man found this unusual. Typically, deep in the Misty Fei Sea, there were large quantities of sea beasts, and they were actually very powerful. However, why did they now wait for nearly 18 hours without seeing a single one? Oh. Why do I feel as if something is wrong here? Zhou suddenly said. He had previously not sensed it, but now, upon careful inspection of the area, he suddenly realized that the heaven-earth yuan qi around the region had thickened greatly. Not only had it thickened, it was also very pure. Although there were some treasure lands deep in the misty Fei Sea, they would not result in such purity. The young disciples were confused as they had no idea how to respond to their master uncle. "What is that?" Zhou's eyes suddenly lit up. As he squinted his eyes, he looked deeply into the misty Fei Sea. The afternoon fog had mostly dissipated, so they could now see even further. What they saw was that, on the azure sea surface, there was a blue vortex spinning at a height of 70 to 80 feet. This vortex was not very obvious. Without using their perception, it was very difficult to even detect it. However, the vortex was not sucking anything in, it was actually spitting yuan qi out. The thicker and purer heaven-earth yuan qi that they previously detected was clearly a result of the spewing from this vortex. What is going on? Could a treasure be appearing? Zhou felt his heart tighten. For a treasure to suddenly appear in the sea was not something out of the question. However, the moment a treasure appeared, it was a huge opportunity. If the treasure was extremely valuable, their white soaring sect would experience a quantum leap. Zhou was feeling excited, however, it did not last for long. Instead, his heart quickly went cold as a sense of extreme danger flooded his heart. He sensed a terrifying power of Desolate's fluctuation in the sea beneath the vortex. Furthermore, it was filled with large quantities of murderous intent. Deep sea beast. Zhou held his breath. A gigantic shadow could be seen lurking beneath the surface of the sea. "Master Uncle Zhou, what is the matter?" The careful oval-faced girl could not help but ask after noticing Zhou's change in expression. Zhou's expression turned solemn as he rapidly said with a deep voice, "Converge your presence, and do not make a sound." He should have realized that if a treasure appeared, it would very likely attract sea beasts. It was no wonder no sea beast cared about their low-quality Fei luring pill. It was because a phenomenon was happening in the deep sea. However, it was unknown what sort of treasure would appear, but from the looks of it, it was likely not destined to be theirs, for they were still very far from their sect, so it was impossible for reinforcements to rush here in time. Zhou no longer had time to feel a sense of regret. What was most important now was to secure his and the young disciples' lives. At this moment, even more heaven-earth yuan qi began to spew out as the vortex grew in intensity, to the point where it could be seen with the naked eye. A few golden points of light condensed in the sky as they spun. Between the dots of light, they formed a purple membrane of light. The membrane of light rapidly expanded, and became a screen a few dozen feet tall. The aura of spatial laws resonated around the screen of light. What is happening? Chapter 559, Exiting the Great Empress Mystic Realm. As the screen of light scintillated, the surrounding heaven-earth yuan qi became thicker, as if it was condensing into a liquid. At this moment, under the sea, a huge shadow slowly approached. It was like the sea surface was sprayed with a layer of ink. "What's that?" A white soaring sect disciple noticed it, but he said it through a yuan qi transmission, as he was afraid to make a noise. This terrifying beast was definitely not a sea beast like a bloodthirsty shark. It was a massive behemoth. Splash! Large amounts of sea water separated and splashed out like a waterfall. A huge black head emerged out from the surface of the sea. The black head was covered in seaweed, barnacles, and seashells. No one knew how deep it came from. The moment it opened its eyes, it was like the black gigantic rock had two glimmering points that gave shivers to people. Around this head, there were several grayish-black snakes that resembled flood dragons. They were wantonly sprawling around in the seawater, setting off even more strong waves. Seeing this scene, Zhou's pupils constricted as he broke out into a cold sweat. Eight-limbed sea dragon. All the other disciples of the white soaring sect turned pale. Eight-limbed sea dragon, is it really the eight-limbed sea dragon? The oval-faced girl's lips were white as she muttered to herself. She had heard of this terrifying monster as it was recorded in several of the Sex books. In the Misty Fae Sea, the Fae was actually referring to the eight-limbed sea dragon. The eight-limbed sea dragon was not a dragon, it was a gigantic octopus. Its 8 tentacles were like flood dragons in the sea. Not only was it extremely destructive, there was a pair of jaws on the ends of each tentacle. The 8 tentacles gave rise to the name of eight-limbed sea dragon. Only the eight-limbed sea dragon could attack the spirit boats of the neighboring small sects, causing tragedies to the boats and people. The eight-limbed sea dragon was definitely an overlord of this region of sea. As for the bloodthirsty sharks the white soaring sect was hunting, they were like plankton to the eight-limbed sea dragon. The low-grade Fae luring pill would not have attracted such a horrifying existence. The eight-limbed sea dragon was attracted by the surging heaven-earth yuan qi that usually accompanied a treasure that was about to appear. Joe's blood seemed to freeze. He felt that the terrible luck he was experiencing had reached an extreme. He encountered a treasure's appearance the first time he brought a team of disciples out into the deep sea, and now, they encountered this monster that was lured here. Under the pressure of the eight-limbed sea dragon, he did not dare to escape. The eight-limbed sea dragon was extremely bad-tempered. It would kill all humans and it was extremely fast, so escaping was equivalent to suicide. However, if they stayed here, from the keen senses of the eight-limbed sea dragon, they might even have been discovered by it, there was nothing left for them to do but wait and die. Upon realizing this, Joe broke out into a cold sweat. At this moment, the eight-limbed sea dragon suddenly opened its mouth. Its massive body seemed to have escaped the surface of the water, causing water to splash up into the sky, obscuring one's sight. It seemed like it was trying to devour the energy vortex. The powerful energy fluctuations caused Joe and company's perception to be completely cut off. They could no longer sense what was happening. Boom! There was an explosion in the water, causing a resounding boom, as the eight-limbed sea dragon returned back to the sea surface. The eight-limbed sea dragon's tentacles were still waving and it seemed like it had failed to devour the energy vortex. However, the next scene alarmed Joe. No one knew when a young man and woman floating high in the sky in the layers of water mist had appeared. The man looked like he was in his 20s. He had a cyan band on his head and he looked very ordinary. He looked like a mortal scholar. As for the woman, she was wearing a long turquoise dress. There was a thin veil that made it hard to see her face. However, just from her figure and discernible facial contours, it was easy to guess that she was a peerless woman. Could this couple, that suddenly appeared above the sea, be here for the treasure? Seeing the young couple against the eight-limbed sea dragon, weren't they going to end up being killed by the large mouths of the eight-limbed sea dragon? Joe held his breath. His life was already in peril, so he could not spare the effort to care about the sudden appearance of the couple. To him, younger generation core disciples of even a large faction in the Tian Yuan world, let alone their small sect, would not be the match for the eight-limbed sea dragon. The couple, who suddenly appeared in the air, was also slightly taken aback when they saw the scene. However, they only seemed like they never expected to encounter such a situation. They did not seem to panic at all. Yi-Yun, what's the matter? This octopus seems to be coming at us. To be attacked after having just appeared out of the Great Empress Mystic Realm, Lin Shintong was quite surprised. Yi-Yun said, maybe it was attracted by the energy emitted by the Great Empress Mystic Realm. For safety's sake, I had chosen the exit farthest away from the Great Empress Mystic Realm main entrance. It's tens of millions of miles away, and since it took a long time to open the exit, the pure energy from the Mystic Realm dissipated out. So it's not surprising that it attracted this desolate beast. Yi-Yun and Lin Shintong had been in reclusion in the God Advent Tower for many years. They had expected that the large factions in the Tian Yuan world would not abandon the Great Empress heritage. The mysterious Blood Moon organization might also do something unfavorable to them. These people would definitely set up layers of posts near the Great Empress Mystic Realm to keep track of their appearance. They might even set up a large array that spanned tens of thousands of miles. As long as there was a spatial yuan qi fluctuation, they would immediately flock to it. Under this scenario, as long as they used a portal to enter the untraversable sea, their positions would be discovered. Then, using the star transference heaven changing skill would be meaningless as their identities would still be under suspicion. Hence, Yi Yun decided to choose the farthest exit. Tens of millions of miles away, all the way to the southern waters of the Tian Yuan world made it meaningless even if the blood moon was extremely powerful. They could not sense a region that spanned tens of millions of miles with a large array. And even if they did, it would be meaningless above such a massive sea, as there were countless numbers of warriors being transported through space. It was impossible for them to track each and every one of them. To be transported to this exit, Yi Yun had consumed a large amount of energy and he took a long time to open this exit. As such, the mystic realm's energy that emitted was naturally a lot more. The energy from the Great Empress mystic realm was extremely pure and refined. The sparse heaven-earth yuan qi and power of Desolates the untraversable sea was nothing in comparison. To the sea beasts in the untraversable sea, who were accustomed to the lacking amounts of energy and grew up over long periods of time, such thick heaven-earth energy was naturally a supplementary item that they had never seen before. Hence, it was understandable that the eight-limbed sea dragon had mistaken it for a treasure appearing. Chapter 560, Suppression. A sea beast and more than 10 people hiding on the island not far away, facing the eight-limbed sea dragon, Yi Yun was not too worried. With a scan of his perception, he had a complete understanding of his environment. And at this moment, the eight-limbed sea dragon had already surfaced. The gigantic pool-like eyes stared at Yi Yun and Lin Xintong, revealing slight fear and cruelty. It sensed that the couple that had suddenly appeared seemed to be a result of the extremely pure heaven-earth energy. If it devoured the two of them, its strength would increase by leaps and bounds, and might even allow it to evolve. Although this couple gave it a great sense of danger, the temptation of evolution made it unbearable. Its 8 tentacles appeared out of the water and they flew at Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. The mouths on the ends of the tentacles opened their jaws as if they were huge pythons that were hunting. Fellow Taoist, be careful. That's a 8-limbed sea dragon. It can topple the sea and it is not something you can handle. It's best that you hurry and escape. At this moment, a Yuan Qi voice transmission rang in Yi Yun and Lin Xintong's ears. It was from Zhou. Zhou seemed to have his heart in his mouth. The reason why he risked informing them was not out of purely good intentions, it was because he did not want them to just die in vain in the stomach of the 8-limbed sea dragon. If Yi Yun and Lin Xintong sensed the powerfulness of the 8-limbed sea dragon and ran, they would be able to attract the attention of the 8-limbed sea dragon. According to the 8-limbed sea dragon's temperament, it would not let its prey run, so it would chase them. Then, Zhou would be able to take the opportunity to escape with his sex juniors. As for the unknown treasure, Zhou did not harbor any thoughts on it. He had no doubt that the 8-limbed sea dragon had already discovered them. It was ignoring them because it was attracted by the treasure and that unlucky couple. Once he tried to risk his life to touch the treasure, he would incur the wrath of the 8-limbed sea dragon, then, he would die a terrible death. Zhou had already issued a kind alert. He thought that even if the couple did not believe his words, they would at least open up a distance to prepare their defense. At least, they would not stick to the water surface where the 8-limbed sea dragon was. This was equivalent to them being sent into the 8 mouths of the 8-limbed sea dragon. However, the next scene made Zhou speechless. After hearing his voice transmission, the youth in his 20s only gave him a slight glance and then, he proceeded to ignore him. Next, he unhurriedly took a golden bow out of his interspatial ring. This bow was decorated with dragons and phoenixes. It looked gaudy, but they were mostly useless decorations that were offensively conspicuous. In Zhou's impression, such a bow was usually used by scions of rich families during their hunting to act in pretense. A real bow that killed was usually brilliant on the inside, and simple on the outside. All the sharpness and murderous intent was contained in the bow, and it would be earth-shaking the moment it struck. These two idiots aren't running? Joe was extremely worried. They are going to kill us. Whatever, let's split up and escape separately. We can't wait any longer. Joe had already categorized Yun and Lin Shintong as foppish people who had never seen bloodshed. These people were ignorant of the world, thinking they were invincible by being able to beat a few people back at home. They were bound to end up in a terrible state in the outside world. Of course, the price that they would pay would be worse. They would most likely bury themselves in the stomach of the eight-limbed sea dragon, and they were not even useful at delaying time. If they did not escape now, they would not have any more chances. Upon hearing that they were to escape separately, all the faces of the white soaring sect disciples turned slightly pale. The meaning meant, try to have as many survive as possible. Especially the oval-faced girl had been scared white. She was like a frightened rabbit. She was still young and her speed was slow. There was almost no doubts that she would be eaten as prey. At this moment, her senior brothers, who usually chased after her, lowered their heads. At the brink of life and death, no one could really disregard their lives for her. Ready. The moment I give the command, run, Joe said. At this moment, a furious roar erupted from the sea. Like a mountain collapsing, the sea shot out like a shockwave, blowing a layer of thick water mist that seemed to form a water wall. Clearly, the eight-limbed sea dragon had turned furious when it saw Yun take out a weapon. The final concerns, it had disappeared as it roared furiously. Its 8 tentacles were like flood dragons that appeared from the sea as it came attacking at Yun and Lin Shintong. Immediately, sea water splashed up, causing towering waves. In the midst of the gigantic waves, Yun remained expressionless. With the bow in hand, he stringed an arrow. Pulling open the bow, shoot. Pang. With a light sound that did not seem earth-shattering, Yun had seemed to have casually shot out an arrow. The arrow on the bowstring had already turned into a brilliant golden beam of light as it flew out. The arrow's speed was extremely fast, like a burning flame. Instantly, it sank into the forehead of the eight-limbed sea dragon. Boom! 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 The 8 tentacles attacked out with the momentum it possessed. But at this moment, a glaring divine light suddenly flared out of the eight-limbed sea dragon's forehead that had been shot by Yun. The divine light illuminated the surroundings in an overwhelming manner. The 8 thick tentacles were also cut off with the appearance of the divine light. Large swaths of blood sprayed after the tentacles were stripped off and flew into the sky, dyeing the sunlight red. The gigantic octopus began to violently tremble. Its huge head began to ignite into a reddish-gold inferno. The intense burning made it seem like a sun had appeared in the sea. The rays of light shot out, basking Joe's face red. Seeing the 8-limbed sea dragon burning in flames, with its 8 tentacles ripped off, he gasped and his eyes lost its focus. Beside him, the white soaring sect disciples were transfixed as their mouths gaped slightly, without being able to close them. In their eyes filled with disbelief, they saw the young man keep the bow and watch the golden flames soar into the sky. He was unimpressed, as if what he did was a trivial matter. Throughout the entire process, the clothes of the bow-wielding youth and the woman beside him were not drenched with any of the water, let alone even move. Even the woman's veil was not lifted by the wind. It was as if everything that had just happened in a different spatial temporal plane. Joe was completely speechless. This wasn't killing an 8-limbed sea dragon, it was killing a small octopus to make into octopus balls. It was as simple as that. At this moment, Joe felt his heart tighten, for he noticed that the bow-wielding man had glanced at him and then flew over to him slowly. Immediately, Joe felt his mind tighten up as his face went pale.